Dove Books on Tape presents The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. The first ray of light which illumines the gloom and converts into a dazzling brilliancy that obscurity in which the earlier history of the public career of the immortal Pickwick would appear to be involved, is derived from the perusal of the following entry in the Transactions of the Pickwick Club. May the 12th, 1827, Joseph Smiggers, Esquire, presiding. The following resolutions unanimously agreed to. That the corresponding society of the Pickwick Club is hereby constituted, and that Samuel Pickwick, Esquire, Tracy Tupman, Esquire, Augustus Snodgrass, Esquire, and Nathaniel Winkle, Esquire, are hereby nominated and appointed members of the same, and that they be requested to forward, from time to time, authenticated accounts of their journeys and investigations, of their observations of character and manners, and of the whole of their adventures, together with all tales and papers to which local scenery or associations may give rise, to the Pickwick Club, stationed in London. A casual observer, adds the Secretary, to whose notes we are indebted for the following account, a casual observer might possibly have remarked nothing extraordinary in the bald head and circular spectacles, which were intently turned towards his, the Secretary's, face during the reading of the above resolutions. To those who knew that the gigantic brain of Pickwick was working beneath that forehead, and that the beaming eyes of Pickwick were twinkling behind those glasses, the sight was indeed an interesting one. And how much more interesting did the spectacle become, when starting into full life and animation, as a simultaneous call for "Pickwick" burst from his followers, the illustrious man slowly mounted into the Windsor chair on which he'd been previously seated, and addressed the club he himself had founded. On his right hand sat Mr. Tracy Tupman, the too susceptible Tupman, who to the wisdom and experience of maturer years superadded the enthusiasm and the ardour of a boy, in the most interesting and pardonable of all human weaknesses, love. Time and feeding had expanded that once romantic form, but the soul of Tupman had known no change. Admiration of the fair sex was still its ruling passion. On the left of his great leader sat the poetic Snodgrass, and near him again the sporting Winkle. Mr. Pickwick observed, says the Secretary, that fame was dear to the heart of every man, and he could not but feel that they had selected him for a service of great honour and of some danger. Travelling was in a troubled state, and the minds of coachmen were unsettled. Let them look abroad and contemplate the scenes which were enacting around them. Thus it was that Mr. Pickwick and his friends set out the following day to discover what they could of the world. That punctual servant of all work, the sun, had just risen and begun to strike a light on the morning of the 13th of May, 1827, when Mr. Samuel Pickwick arrived at the coach station of St. Martin's le Grand. "Cab," said Mr. Pickwick. The first cab having been fetched from the public house, Mr. Pickwick and his portmanteau were thrown into the vehicle. "Golden Cross," said Mr. Pickwick. "Only a bob's worth, Tommy," cried the driver sulkily for the information of his friend the waterman, as the cab drove off. "How old is that horse, my friend?" inquired Mr. Pickwick, rubbing his nose with the shilling he had reserved for the fare. 42, replied the driver, eyeing him askant. Mr. Pickwick entered this in his notebook with the view of communicating it to the club as a singular instance of the tenacity of life in horses under trying circumstances. The entry was scarcely completed when they reached the Golden Cross. Down jumped the driver, and out got Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Tupman, Mr. Snodgrass, and Mr. Winkle, who had been anxiously waiting the arrival of their illustrious leader, crowded to welcome him. "Here's your fare," said Mr. Pickwick, holding out a shilling to the driver. What was the learned man's astonishment when that unaccountable person flung the money on the pavement and requested, in figurative terms, to be allowed the pleasure of fighting Mr. Pickwick for the amount. "You're mad," said Mr. Snodgrass. "Or drunk," said Mr. Winkle. "Or both," said Mr. Tupman. "Come on," said the cab driver, sparring away like clockwork. "Come on, all four of you." "What's the fun?" said a rather tall, thin young man in a green coat, emerging suddenly from the coach-yard. "Informers!" shouted the driver. "We are not," roared Mr. Pickwick in a tone which to any dispassionate listener carried conviction with it. "Ain't you, though? Ain't you?" said the young man, appealing to Mr. Pickwick, making his way through the crowd that had gathered. That learned man, in a few hurried words, explained the real state of the case. "Come along, then," said he of the green coat, lugging Mr. Pickwick after him by main force and talking the whole way. "Here, number 924, take your fare and take yourself off. Respected gentlemen, know him well. None of your nonsense accidents will happen. Best regulated families. Never say die. Down upon your luck. Damn rascals." And with a lengthened string of similar broken sentences, delivered with extraordinary volubility, the stranger led the way to the travellers' waiting room, whither he was closely followed by Mr. Pickwick and his disciples. While his three companions were busily engaged in proffering their thanks to their new acquaintance, Mr. Pickwick had leisure to examine his costume and appearance. He was about the middle height, but the thinness of his body and the length of his legs gave him the appearance of being much taller. The green coat had been a smart dress garment in the days of swallowtails, but had evidently in those times adorned a much shorter man than the stranger, for the soiled and faded sleeves reached scarcely to his wrists. His face was thin and haggard, but an indescribable air of jaunty impudence and perfect self-possession pervaded the whole man. Mr. Pickwick's observations were interrupted by the entrance of the Rochester coachman to announce that the Commodore was on the point of starting. "Commodore?" said the stranger, starting up. "My coach." Now it so happened that Mr. Pickwick and his three companions had resolved to make Rochester their first halting-place too, and having intimated to their new-found acquaintance that they were journeying to the same city, they agreed to occupy the seat at the back of the coach where they could all sit together. "I was ruminating," said Mr. Pickwick as the coach got under way, "on the strange mutability of human affairs." "Ah, I see. In at the palace door one day, out the window the next. Philosopher, sir?" "An observer of human nature, sir," said Mr. Pickwick. "Ah, so am I. Most people are when they've little to do and less to get. Poet, sir?" "My friend Mr. Snodgrass has a poetic turn," said Mr. Pickwick. "And so have I," said the stranger. "Epic poem, 10,000 lines, Revolution of July, composed it on the spot. Mars by day, Apollo by night. Bang the field pence, twang the lyre." "You were present at that glorious scene, sir," said Mr. Snodgrass. "Present? I think I was. Fired a musket, fired with an idea, rushed into wine shop, wrote it down, back again, whiz-bang another idea, wine shop again, pen and ink, back again, cut and slash, noble time, sir." And the stranger continued to soliloquize until they reached the Bull Inn in the High Street, where the coach stopped, and after bidding each other good night, they parted ways. Mr. Pickwick, his disciples, and the whole population of Rochester and the adjoining towns rose from their beds at an early hour of the following morning in a state of the utmost bustle and excitement. A grand review was to take place upon the lines. The manoeuvres of half a dozen regiments were to be inspected by the eagle eye of the commander-in-chief. Temporary fortifications had been erected, the citadel was to be attacked and taken, and a mine was to be sprung. At length that low roar of many voices ran through the crowd, which usually announces the arrival of whatever they'd been waiting for. All eyes were turned in the direction of the sally-port. A few moments of eager expectation, and the colours were seen fluttering gaily in the air, arms glistened brightly in the sun, column after column, poured onto the plain. The troops halted and formed. The word of command rang through the line. There was a general clash of muskets as arms were presented, and the Commander-in-Chief, Colonel Bulder, cantered to the front. The command, "Eyes front," had been given, and all the spectator saw before him was several thousand pairs of optics staring straight forward, wholly divested of any expression whatever. "What are they doing now?" inquired Mr. Pickwick, adjusting his spectacles. I rather think," said Mr. Winkle, changing colour, "I rather think they're going to fire." "Nonsense," said Mr. Pickwick hastily. I really rather think they are," urged Mr. Snodgrass, somewhat alarmed. Man is but mortal, and there is a point beyond which human courage cannot extend. Mr. Pickwick gazed through his spectacles for an instant on the advancing mass, and then fairly turned his back and trotted away at as quick a rate as his legs would convey him. There was a fine, gentle wind, and Mr. Pickwick's hat rolled sportively before it. The wind puffed, and Mr. Pickwick puffed, and the hat rolled over and over as merrily as a lively porpoise in a strong tide, and on it might have rolled far beyond Mr. Pickwick's reach, had not its course been providentially stopped, just as that gentleman was on the point of resigning it to its fate. Mr. Pickwick was completely exhausted when the hat was blown with some violence against the wheel of a carriage. Looking upwards, he beheld a sight which filled him with surprise and pleasure. In an open barouche, the horses of which had been taken out, the better to accommodate it to the crowded place, stood a stout old gentleman in a blue coat and bright buttons, corduroy breeches and top boots, two young ladies in scarves and feathers, a lady of doubtful age, probably the aunt of the aforesaid, and Mr. Tupman, as easy and unconcerned as if he had belonged to the family from the first moments of his infancy. Fastened up behind the barouche was a hamper of spacious dimensions, and on the box sat a fat and red-faced boy in a state of somnolency, whom no speculative observer could have regarded for an instant without setting down as the official dispenser of the contents of the before-mentioned hamper when the proper time for their consumption should arrive. Mr. Pickwick had bestowed a hasty glance on these interesting objects when he was greeted by his faithful disciple. "Pickwick, Pickwick," said Mr. Tupman, "come up here, make haste." "Come along, sir, pray come up," said the stout gentleman. "Joe, damn that boy, he's gone to sleep again. Joe, make room for one of these gentlemen on the box. Now, sir, come along." And the stout gentleman extended his arm and pulled first Mr. Pickwick and then Mr. Snodgrass into the barouche by main force. Mr. Winkle mounted to the box, the fat boy waddled to the same perch and fell asleep instantly. "Well, gentlemen," said the stout man, "very glad to see you. Know you very well, gentlemen, though you mayn't remember me. I spent some evenings in your club last winter, picked up my friend Mr. Tupman here this morning, and very glad I was to see him. My daughters, gentlemen, my gals, these are, and that's my sister, Miss Rachel Wardle. She's a miss, she is, and she ain't a miss, eh, sir? Eh?" And the stout gentleman playfully inserted his elbow between the ribs of Mr. Pickwick and laughed very heartily. The knives and forks were handed in, and dishes on everybody's knees in endless number. "Now, ain't this capital?" inquired that jolly personage, when the work of destruction had commenced. "Capital," said Mr. Winkle, who was carving a fowl on the box. "How dear Emily is flirting with the strange gentleman," whispered the spinster aunt with true spinster aunt-like envy to her brother Mr. Wardle. "Oh, I don't know," said the jolly gentleman. "All very natural, I dare say." "Do you think my dear niece is pretty?" whispered their affectionate aunt to Mr. Tupman. "I should if their aunt wasn't here," replied the ready Pickwickian with a passionate glance. "Oh, you naughty man! But really, if their complexion were a little better, don't you think they would be nice-looking girls? By candlelight?" "Yes, I think they would," said Mr. Tupman with an air of indifference. "Oh, you quiz. I know what you were going to say." "What?" inquired Mr. Tupman, who had not precisely made up his mind to say anything at all. You were going to say that Isabella stoops. I know you were. You men are such observers. Well, so she does. Can't be denied. Well, you are a quiz. Mr. Tupman had no objection to earning the reputation at so cheap a rate, so he looked very knowing and smiled mysteriously. "What a sarcastic smile," said the admiring Rachel. "I know what that smile means very well. You mean that you don't think Isabella's stooping is as bad as Emily's boldness. Well, she is bold." Here the affectionate relative heaved a deep sigh and shook her head despondingly. "I'm sure Aunt's talking about us," whispered Miss Emily Wardle to her sister. "I'm quite certain of it. She looks so malicious." "Is she?" replied Isabella. "Aunt, dear?" "Yes, dear love?" "I'm so afraid you'll catch cold, Aunt. Have a silk handkerchief to tie round your dear old head. You really should take care of yourself. Consider your age." However well-deserved this piece of retaliation might have been, it was as vindictive a one as could well have been resorted to. There is no guessing in what form of reply the aunt's indignation would have vented itself, had not Mr. Wardle unconsciously changed the subject by inviting Mr. Pickwick and his friends to join him at his home the following day. "You've got the address?" "Manor Farm, Dingley Dell," said Mr. Pickwick, consulting his pocket-book. The horses were put in, the driver mounted, the fat boy clambered to his side, farewells were exchanged, and the carriage rattled off. As the Pickwickians turned round to take a last glimpse of it, the setting sun cast a rich glow on the faces of their entertainers, and fell upon the form of the fat boy. His head was sunk upon his bosom, and he slumbered again. When Mr. Pickwick and his friends arrived at Dingley Dell the following day, several guests who were assembled in the old parlour rose to greet them, and during the performance of the ceremony of introduction with all due formalities, Mr. Pickwick had leisure to observe the appearance and speculate upon the characters and pursuits of the persons by whom he was surrounded, a habit in which he, in common with many other great men, delighted to indulge. A very old lady, in a lofty cap and faded silk gown, no less a personage than Mr. Wardle's mother, occupied the post of honour on the right-hand corner of the chimney-piece. The aunt, the two young ladies, and Mr. Wardle, each vying with the other in paying zealous and unremitting attentions to the old lady, crowded round her easy chair, one holding her ear-trumpet, another an orange, and a third a smelling bottle, while a fourth was busily engaged in patting and punching the pillows that were arranged for her support. "Come, come," said the bustling host. "What say you to a rubber, Mr. Pickwick?" "I should like it of all things," replied that gentleman. "Joe, Joe," said Mr. Wardle. "Joe, damn that, oh, here he is. Put out the card tables." The lethargic youth contrived, without any additional rousing, to set out 2 card tables, the one for Pope Joan and the other for whist. The whist players were Mr. Pickwick and the old lady, along with several other guests. The round game comprised the rest of the company. The rubber was conducted with all that gravity of deportment and sedateness of demeanour which befit the pursuit entitled whist. Meanwhile the round game proceeded right merrily. Isabella Wardle and a Mr. Trundle went partners, and Emily Wardle and Mr. Snodgrass did the same, and even Mr. Tupman and the spinster aunt established a joint stock company of fish and flattery. When the spinster aunt got matrimony, the young ladies laughed, and the spinster aunt seemed disposed to be pettish, until, feeling Mr. Tupman squeezing her hand under the table, she brightened up too, and looked rather knowing, as if matrimony in reality were not quite so far off as some people thought. The evening glided swiftly away, and Mr. Pickwick thought he had never felt so happy in his life. The fatiguing adventures of the day operated so strongly on the drowsy tendency of Mr. Pickwick that in less than 5 minutes after he had been shown to his comfortable bedroom, he fell into a sound and dreamless sleep, from which he was only awakened by the morning sun darting his bright beams reproachfully into the apartment. Mr. Pickwick was no sluggard, and he sprang like an ardent warrior from his tent bedstead. "How are you?" said Mr. Wardle, when Mr. Pickwick descended. "Your friend Mr. Winkle and I are going out rook shooting before breakfast. He's a very good shot, ain't he?" "I've heard him say he's a capital one," replied Mr. Pickwick, "but I never saw him aim at anything." The host, carrying both guns like a second Robinson Crusoe, led the way from the garden. "Here they are," said Mr. Pickwick, and as he spoke the forms of Mr. Tupman, Mr. Snodgrass, and Mr. Winkle appeared in the distance. The old gentleman nodded, and two ragged boys who had been marshalled to the spot forthwith commenced climbing up two of the trees. "What are those lads for?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "Only to start the game," replied Mr. Wardle, laughing. Here one boy shouted, and shook a branch with a nest in it. Half a dozen young rooks, in violent conversation, flew out to ask what the matter was. The old gentleman fired, Mr. Winkle fired. There was a scream, as of an individual, not a rook, in corporeal anguish. Mr. Tupman had saved the lives of innumerable offending birds by receiving a portion of the charge in his left arm. To describe the confusion that ensued would be impossible. Mr. Pickwick, in the first transports of his emotion, called Mr. Winkle wretch. Mr. Tupman lay prostrate on the ground. Mr. Winkle knelt, horror-stricken, beside him. They drew near the house. The ladies were at the garden gate waiting for their arrival and their breakfast. "What's the matter?" screamed the ladies. "Mr. Tupman has met with a little accident, that's all." The spinster aunt uttered a piercing scream, burst into an hysteric laugh, and fell backwards in the arms of her nieces. "Throw some cold water over her," said the old gentleman. "No, no," murmured the spinster aunt. "I'm better now." She leaned towards Mr. Tupman. "Are you faint?" inquired the anxious Rachel. "No," said Mr. Tupman. "It's nothing. I shall be better presently." He closed his eyes. "He sleeps," murmured the spinster aunt. His organs of vision had been closed nearly 20 seconds. "Dear, dear Mr. Tupman." Mr. Tupman jumped up. "Oh, say those words again," he exclaimed. The lady started. "Hush," she said. "My brother." Mr. Tracy Tupman resumed his former position, and Mr. Wardle, accompanied by a surgeon, entered the room. The arm was examined, the wound dressed and pronounced to be a very slight one, and it was settled that Mr. Tupman should be left at home in charge of the females, and that the remainder of the guests, under the guidance of Mr. Wardle, should proceed to Muggleton, where a game of cricket was to take place. As their walk lay through shady lanes and sequestered footpaths, and as their conversation turned upon the delightful scenery by which they were on every side surrounded, Mr. Pickwick was almost inclined to regret the expedition they had used when he found himself at the cricket tent in Muggleton. "Capital game, smart sport, fine exercise, very," were the words which fell upon Mr. Pickwick's ear as he entered the tent, and the first object that met his eyes was his green-coated friend of the Rochester coach, holding forth to the no small delight and edification of a select circle of the chosen of all Muggleton. His dress was slightly improved, and he wore boots, but there was no mistaking him. The stranger recognized his friends immediately, and darting forward and seizing Mr. Pickwick by the hand, dragged him to a seat with his usual impetuosity, talking all the while as if the whole of the arrangements were under his especial patronage and direction. This way, capital fun, lots of beer, hogsheads, rounds of beef, bullocks, mustard, cartloads, glorious day. Down with you, make yourself at home. Glad to see you, very." Two of the principal members of the Dingley Dale Club approached Mr. Pickwick and said, "We are about to partake of a plain dinner at the Blue Lion, sir. We hope you and your friends will join us." "Of course," said Mr. Wardle. "Among our friends we include Mr. And he looked towards the stranger. "Jingle," said that versatile gentleman, taking the hint at once. "Jingle. Alfred Jingle, Esquire, of No Hall, Nowhere." "I shall be very happy, I'm sure," said Mr. Pickwick. "So shall I," said Mr. Alfred Jingle, and drawing one arm through Mr. Pickwick's and another through Mr. Wardle's, he set off for dinner. While this was taking place, the quiet seclusion of Dingley Dell The presence of so many of the gentler sex, and the solicitude and anxiety they evinced on his behalf, were all favourable to the growth and development of those softer feelings which nature had implanted deep in the bosom of Mr. Tracy Tupman, and which now appeared destined to centre in one lovely object, Miss Rachel Wardle. It was evening. Isabella and Emily had strolled out together. The deaf old lady had fallen asleep in her chair, as the interesting pair, dreaming only of themselves, strolled through the gardens. The spinster aunt took up a large watering pot which lay in one corner, when Mr. Tupman detained her in the arbour and drew her to a seat beside him. "Miss Wardle," said he. The spinster aunt trembled till some pebbles which had accidentally found their way into the large watering pot shook like an infant's rattle. "Miss Wardle," said Mr. Tupman, "you're an angel." "Mr. Tupman," exclaimed Rachel, blushing as red as the watering pot itself. "Nay," said the eloquent Pickwickian, "I know it but too well." The lady turned aside her head. "Men are such deceivers," she softly whispered. They are," ejaculated Mr. Tupman. "But not all men." Here he fell on his knees. "Oh, Rachel," he seized her passive hand, and the watering pot fell to the ground as he pressed it to his lips. "Oh, Rachel, say you love me." "Mr. Tupman," said the spinster aunt with averted head, "I can hardly speak the words, but you are not wholly indifferent to me." Mr. Tupman no sooner heard this avowal than he proceeded to do what his enthusiastic emotions prompted, and throwing his arm round the neck of the spinster aunt, imprinted upon her lips numerous kisses, which after a due show of struggling and resistance she received so passively that there is no telling how many more Mr. Tupman might have bestowed, if the lady had not given a very unaffected start, and exclaimed in an affrighted tone, "Mr. Tupman, we are observed, we are discovered." Mr. Tupman looked around. There was the fat boy, perfectly motionless, with his large circular eyes staring into the arbour. "What do you want here, sir?" said Mr. Tupman. "Supper's ready, sir," was the prompt reply. Mr. Tupman looked at him very hard, but there was not a wink in his eye or a curve in his face. Mr. Tupman took the arm of the spinster aunt and walked towards the house. The fat boy followed behind. "He knows nothing of what has happened," he whispered. "Nothing," said the spinster aunt. "Must have been fast asleep," whispered Mr. Tupman. "I've not the least doubt of it," replied the spinster aunt, and they both laughed heartily. Mr. Tupman was wrong. The fat boy for once had not been fast asleep. He was awake, wide awake, to what had been going forward. The supper passed off without any attempt at general conversation. 11, 12, 1 o'clock had struck, and the gentleman had not arrived. Consternation sat on every face. Could they have been waylaid and robbed? Should they send men and lanterns in every direction, or should they— Hark! There they were. What could have made them so late? A strange voice, too, to whom could it belong? They rushed into the kitchen, whither the truants had repaired, and at once obtained rather more than a glimmering of the real state of the case. Mr. Pickwick, with his hands in his pockets and his hat cocked completely over his left eye, was leaning against the dresser, shaking his head from side to side, and producing a constant succession of the blandest and most benevolent smiles, without being moved thereunto by any discernible cause or pretence whatsoever. Old Mr. Wardle, with a highly inflamed countenance, was grasping the hand of a strange gentleman, muttering protestations of eternal friendship. Mr. Jingle. "Let's have another bottle," cried Mr. Winkle, commencing in a very loud key and ending in a very faint one. His head dropped upon his breast, and muttering his invincible determination not to go to bed, and a sanguinary regret that he had not done for old Tupman in the morning, he fell asleep. in which condition he was borne to his apartment by two young giants under the personal superintendence of the fat boy, to whose protecting care Mr. Snodgrass shortly afterwards confided his own person. Mr. Pickwick accepted the proffered arm of Mr. Tupman and quietly disappeared. The indefatigable stranger rose betimes next morning, and although his companions remained in bed overpowered with the dissipation of the previous night, exerted himself most successfully to promote the hilarity of the breakfast table. So successful were his efforts that even the deaf old lady insisted on having one or two of his best jokes retailed through the trumpet. It was the old lady's habit on the fine summer mornings to repair to the arbour in which Mr. Tupman had already signalized himself, and this she did. She was not a little surprised on this particular morning to see the fat boy, instead of leaving the arbour, walk a few paces out of it, look carefully round him in every direction, and return towards her with great stealth and an air of the most profound mystery. "Missus!" Now it so happened that Mr. Jingle was walking in the garden close to the arbour at this moment. He too heard the shout of "Missus!" and stopped to hear more. "What do you think I see in this very arbour last night?" inquired the boy. "Bless us! What?" exclaimed the old lady, alarmed at the solemn manner of the corpulent youth. "The strange gentleman. Him as had his arm hurt. A-kissing and hugging." "Who, Joe? None of the servants, I hope?" "Worser than that," roared the fat boy in the old lady's ear. "Miss Rachel!" It was a remarkable coincidence, perhaps, but it was nevertheless a fact that Mr. Jingle, within 5 minutes after his arrival at Manor Farm on the preceding night, had inwardly resolved to lay siege to the heart of the spinster aunt without delay. He had observation enough to see that his offhand manner was by no means disagreeable to the fair object of his attack, and he had more than a strong suspicion that she possessed that most desirable of all requisites, a small independence. Full of reflections upon this, he crept from his place of concealment and, under cover of the shrubs, approached the house. The breakfast parlour door was partially open. He peeped in. The spinster aunt was knitting. He coughed. She looked up and smiled. Hesitation formed no part of Mr. Alfred Jingle's character. He laid his finger on his lips, mysteriously walked in, and closed the door. "Miss Wardle," said Mr. Jingle, with affected earnestness, "forgive intrusion, short acquaintance, no time for ceremony, all discovered." "Sir," said the spinster aunt, rather astonished by the unexpected apparition, and somewhat doubtful of Mr. Jingle's sanity. "Hush," said Mr. Jingle in a stage whisper. "Large boy, dumpling face, round eyes, rascal. Told the old lady furious, wild, raving, arbour, Tupman, kissing and hugging, all that sort of thing. Eh, ma'am, eh?" "Mr. Jingle," said the spinster aunt, "if you come here, sir, to insult me—" "Oh, not at all, by no means," replied the unabashed Mr. Jingle. "Overheard the tale, came to warn you of your danger, tender my services." "What shall I do?" said the poor spinster, bursting into tears. "My brother will be furious." "Say he dreamt it," replied Mr. Jingle coolly. A ray of comfort darted across the mind of the spinster aunt at this suggestion. Mr. Jingle perceived it and followed up his advantage. That insinuating gentleman sighed deeply, fixed his eyes on the spinster aunt's face for a couple of minutes, started melodramatically, and suddenly withdrew them. "You seem unhappy, Mr. Jingle," said the lady in a plaintive voice. "Ha!" exclaimed Mr. Jingle. "Your love bestowed upon a man who even now contemplates a design upon the affections of the niece of the creature who— but no, he's my friend. I will not expose his vices. Miss Wardle, farewell." "Stay, Mr. Jingle," said the spinster aunt emphatically. "You have made allusion to Mr. Tupman. Explain it." "Never!" exclaimed Jingle. "Never!" And by way of showing that he had no desire to be questioned further, he drew a chair close to that of the spinster aunt and sat down. "Tupman only wants your money." "The wretch!" exclaimed the spinster, with energetic indignation. Mr. Jingle's doubts were resolved. She had money. "More than that," said Jingle. "Loves another." "Another?" ejaculated the spinster. "Who?" "Short girl, black eyes, niece Emily." There was a pause. Now, if there were one individual in the whole world of whom the spinster aunt entertained a mortal and deep-rooted jealousy, it was this identical niece. The colour rushed over her face and neck, and she tossed her head in silence with an air of ineffable contempt. At last, biting her thin lips and bridling up, she said, "It can't be. I won't believe it." "Watch 'em," said Jingle. "I will," said the aunt. "He'll cut you." "Cut me?" screamed the spinster aunt. "He cut me? Will he?" And she trembled with rage and disappointment. "You will convince yourself?" said Jingle. "I will." The burden of proof lay with Mr. Alfred Jingle, and he produced his evidence that very day at dinner. The spinster aunt could hardly believe her eyes. Mr. Tracy Tupman was established at Emily's side, ogling, whispering, and smiling in opposition to Mr. Snodgrass. Not a word, not a look, not a glance did he bestow upon his heart's pride of the evening before. "Damn that boy," thought old Mr. Wardle to himself. He'd heard the story from his mother. "Damn that boy. He must have been asleep. It's all imagination." Traitor, thought the spinster aunt. Dear Mr. Jingle was not deceiving me. Oh, how I hate the wretch. What neither knew was that Mr. Alfred Jingle had secretly prepared his friend Mr. Tupman to do nothing that might compromise him in the old man's eyes. Not a wink, not a syllable, not a whisper. "All your attentions to the niece," Mr. Jingle had advised him, and Mr. Tupman took care to listen to his advice. A few days later, the supper was ready laid, the chairs were drawn round the table, bottles, jugs, and glasses were arranged upon the sideboard. Heavy footsteps were heard in the passage. The parlour door was suddenly burst open, and a man who had cleaned Mr. Pickwick's boots on his first arrival rushed into the room, followed by the fat boy and all the domestics. "What the devil's the meaning of this?" exclaimed the host. "They are gone, master, they gone clean off, sir." At this juncture Mr. Tupman was observed to lay down his knife and fork and to turn very pale. "Who's gone?" said Mr. Wardle fiercely. "Mr. Jingle and Miss Rachel in a post-chaise from Blue Lion, Muggleton. I was there. I couldn't stop 'em, so I run off to tell ye." "Lord preserve us," ejaculated Mr. Pickwick. "What shall we do?" "Do?" said the stout old host. "Put the horse in the gig. I'll get a chaise at the Lion and follow 'em instantly." A few moments later they jumped into a gig. "Give her a head, Tom," cried the host, and away they went, down the narrow lanes, jolting in and out of the cart ruts, and bumping up against the hedges on either side, as if they were to go to pieces every moment. Mr. Pickwick drew his coat close about him, coiled himself snugly up into the corner of the chaise, and fell into a sound sleep. They had travelled in this way about 3 miles, when Mr. Wardle, who had been looking out of the window for 2 or 3 minutes, suddenly drew in his face, covered with splashes, and exclaimed in breathless eagerness, "Here they are!" Mr. Pickwick thrust his head out of the window. Yes, there was a chaise and 4, a short distance before them, dashing along at full gallop. "Go on, go on!" almost shrieked the old gentleman. 2 guineas apiece, boys! Don't let 'em gain on us!" The horses in the first chaise started on at their utmost speed, and those in Mr. Wardle's galloped furiously behind them. Fields, trees, and hedges seemed to rush past them with the velocity of a whirlwind. Old Wardle foamed with rage and excitement when a tremendous jolt threw them forward against the front of the vehicle. There was a sudden bump, a loud crash, away rolled a wheel, and over went the chaise. After a very few seconds of bewilderment and confusion, in which nothing but the plunging of horses and the breaking of glass could be made out, Mr. Pickwick felt himself violently pulled out from among the ruins of the chaise. "How far is it to the next stage?" inquired Mr. Wardle of one of the boys. 6 mile, and it, came the reply. "Can't be helped," said Mr. Wardle. "We must walk it, Pickwick." So Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Wardle set manfully forward on the walk, first tying their shawls round their necks and slouching down their hats to escape as much as possible from the deluge of rain which had begun to pour heavily down. While they were thus on their way, in the White Hart Inn in London, a man was busily employed in brushing the dirt off a pair of boots. He was habited in a coarse striped waistcoat, with black calico sleeves and blue glass buttons, drab breeches and leggings. There was a loud ring, and the bustling old landlady made her appearance. "Sam," cried the landlady, "where's that lazy, idle—" "Why, Sam, oh, there you are. Why don't you answer?" "Wouldn't be genteel to answer till you'd done the talking," replied Sam. "Here, clean them shoes for number 17 directly, and take 'em to private sitting room number 5, first floor." The landlady flung a pair of ladies' shoes into the yard and bustled away. Having cleaned them, Sam ascended the stairs and arrived at the door of number 5. "Come in," said a man's voice in reply to Sam's rap at the door. When he had deposited the boots, Sam left the room. "9:30, just the time, off at once," said the gentleman, whom we hardly need introduce as Mr. Jingle. "Time? For what?" said the spinster aunt coquettishly. "Licence, dearest of angels. Give notice at the church. Call you mine tomorrow," said Mr. Jingle, and he squeezed the spinster aunt's hand. "Don't be long," said the spinster affectionately. "Long away from you, cruel charmer," and Mr. Jingle skipped playfully up to the spinster aunt, imprinted a chaste kiss upon her lips, and danced out of the room. "Dear man," said the spinster as the door closed after him. "Rum old girl," said Mr. Jingle as he walked down the passage. Soon after, 2 plump gentlemen and 1 thin one entered the yard and looked round in search of some authorized person of whom they could make a few inquiries. Mr. Samuel Weller happened to be at that moment engaged in burnishing a pair of painted tops, and it was to him that Mr. Pickwick, for it was no other than that jolly personage, and his friends addressed themselves. "We want to know," said the thin man, "who you've got in this house at present." "Who?" said Sam. "Well, there's a wooden leg at number 6, there's a pair of Hessians in 13, there's these here painted tops in the snuggery inside the bar, and, stop a bit, there's a pair of Wellingtons a good deal worn, and a pair of ladies' shoes in number 5. "What sort of shoes?" inquired Wardle. "Country make," replied Sam. "Any maker's name?" "Brown, of Muggleton." "It's them!" exclaimed Wardle. "By heavens, we've found them!" "Hush," said Sam, "the Wellingtons have gone to Doctor's Commons." "We're in time," exclaimed Wardle. "Show us the room, not a moment is to be lost." Sam threw the painted tops into a corner and led the way through a dark passage and up a wide staircase. He paused at the end of a second passage. Old Wardle opened the door, and the whole 3 walked into the room, just as Mr. Jingle, who had that moment returned, had produced the licence to the spinster aunt. The spinster uttered a loud shriek, and throwing herself in a chair, covered her face with her hands. Mr. Jingle crumpled up the licence and thrust it into his coat pocket. The unwelcome visitors advanced into the middle of the room. "Who the devil are you?" inquired Mr. Jingle of the thin man, in so fierce a tone that the little gentleman involuntarily fell back a step or 2. "Who is he, you scoundrel?" interposed Wardle. "He's my lawyer, Mr. Perker of Gray's Inn. Perker, I'll have this fellow prosecuted, indicted. I'll ruin him. And you," continued Mr. Wardle, turning abruptly round to his sister, "get on your bonnet." "Do nothing of the kind," said Jingle. "Leave the room, sir. No business here. Lady's free to act as she pleases. More than 1 and 20. "More than 1 and 20, ejaculated Wardle contemptuously. "More than 1 and 40. "I ain't," said the spinster aunt, her indignation getting the better of her determination to faint. "You are," replied Wardle. "You're 50 if you're an hour." Here the spinster aunt uttered a loud shriek and became senseless. "A glass of water," said the humane Mr. Pickwick, summoning the landlady. "A glass of water," said the passionate Wardle. "Bring a bucket and throw it all over. It'll do her good. She richly deserves it." Mr. Jingle imposed. "Boots," said he, "get me an officer." Stay, said little Mr. Perker. "Consider, sir, consider." "Mr. Jingle, "Will you step with us into the next room for a moment?" Mr. Jingle assented, and the quartet walked into an empty apartment. "Now, sir," said the little man, as he carefully closed the door, "is there no way of accommodating this matter? Don't you think, now I put it to you, don't you think that £50 and liberty would be better than Miss Wardle and expectation?" "Won't do, not half enough," said Mr. Jingle, rising. "Say 100. Come." "And 20, said Mr. Jingle. "I'll write you a cheque," said the little man, and down he sat at the table for that purpose. "Here," said the hardened traitor, tossing the licence at Mr. Pickwick's feet. "Get the name altered. Take home the lady. Do for tuppy." Shall we tell the lamentations that ensued when Miss Wardle found herself deserted by the faithless Jingle? Shall we extract Mr. Pickwick's masterly description of that heart-rending scene? His notebook, blotted with the tears of sympathizing humanity, lies open before us. One word, and it's in the printer's hands. But no, we will be resolute. We will not wring the public bosom with the delineation of such suffering. Slowly and sadly did the friends take their leave, Mr. Wardle and his sister to return to Muggleton, Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Perker to London. End of Side 1. Side 2. Mr. Pickwick's apartments in Goswell Street, although on a limited scale, were not only of a very neat and comfortable description, but peculiarly adapted for the residence of a man of his genius and observation. His landlady, Mrs. Bardell, the relict and sole executrix of a deceased custom-house officer, was a comely woman of bustling manners and agreeable appearance. One day, shortly after his return, Mrs. Bardell found Mr. Pickwick pacing the room to and fro with hurried steps. It was evident that something of great importance was in contemplation. "Mrs. Bardell," said Mr. Pickwick at the expiration of a few minutes. "Sir," said Mrs. Bardell, "do you think it a much greater expense to keep 2 people than to keep 1? "La, Mr. Pickwick," said Mrs. Bardell, colouring up to the very border of her cap, as she fancied she observed a species of matrimonial twinkle in the eyes of her lodger. "La, Mr. Pickwick, what a question!" "Well, but do you?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. Mrs. Bardell could only reply by a look. She had long worshipped Mr. Pickwick at a distance, but here she was, all at once, raised to a pinnacle to which her wildest and most extravagant hopes had never dared to aspire. Mr. Pickwick was going to propose. "Well," said Mr. Pickwick, "what do you think?" "Oh, you kind, good, playful dear," said Mrs. Bardell, and without more ado, she arose from her chair and flung her arms round Mr. Pickwick's neck with a cataract of tears and a chorus of sobs. "Bless my soul!" cried the astonished Mr. Pickwick. Entreaty and remonstrance were unavailable, for Mrs. Bardell had fainted in Mr. Pickwick's arms, and before he could gain time to deposit her on a chair, Master Bardell entered the room, ushering in Mr. Tupman, Mr. Winkle, and Mr. Snodgrass. Mr. Pickwick was struck motionless and speechless. He stood with his lovely burden in his arms, gazing vacantly on the countenances of his friends, without the slightest attempt at recognition or explanation. They, in their turn, stared at him, and Master Bardell, in his turn, stared at everybody. At last, Mr. Pickwick freed himself of Mrs. Bardell's embrace, and Mrs. Bardell hurried from the room. "There's a man in the passage waiting for you," said Mr. Tupman. "It's the man I spoke to you about," said Mr. Pickwick. "Have the goodness to call him up, Mr. Snodgrass." Mr. Snodgrass did as he was desired, and Mr. Samuel Weller forthwith presented himself. "Oh, you remember me, I suppose?" said Mr. Pickwick. "I should think so," replied Sam with a patronizing wink. "Queer start, that here, but he was one too many for you, weren't he? Up to snuff and a pinch or 2 over, eh?" "Never mind that matter now," said Mr. Pickwick hastily. I want to speak to you about something else. Sit down." Down Sam sat, without further bidding. A sunbeam of placid benevolence played on Mr. Pickwick's features as he said, "I've half made up my mind to engage you." "Have you, though?" said Sam. Mr. Pickwick nodded in the affirmative. "Wages?" inquired Sam. £12 a year," replied Mr. Pickwick. "Clothes? 2 suits. Work? To attend upon me, and travel about with me and these gentlemen here." "You accept the situation?" "Certainly," replied Sam. "If the clothes fits me half as well as the place, they'll do." In this way, Sam Weller came to be Mr. Pickwick's manservant, and it was a decision that neither Sam nor Mr. Pickwick would ever come to regret. As soon as his manservant was newly clothed and fitted, Mr. Pickwick decided to depart for Bury St. Edmunds, where he had heard that a man approximating to Mr. Jingle's description had last been seen. The coach he had taken rattled through the well-paved streets of the handsome little town of thriving and cleanly appearance, and stopped before a large inn situated in a wide-open street, nearly facing the old abbey. "And this," said Mr. Pickwick, looking up, "is the Angel. We are light here, Sam, but some caution is necessary. Order a private room and do not mention either my name or your own, you understand?" "Right as a trivet, sir," replied Mr. Weller with a wink of intelligence. A private room was speedily engaged, and into it Mr. Pickwick was ushered without delay. In half an hour, Mr. Pickwick was seated at a very satisfactory dinner, and in 3/4 of an hour Mr. Weller returned with the intelligence that Mr. Jingle, under the name of Charles Fitz-Marshall, had ordered his private room to be retained for him until further notice. Early on the ensuing morning, Mr. Weller was dispelling all the feverish remains of the previous night's conviviality through the instrumentality of a halfpenny shower bath, when he was attracted by the appearance of a young fellow in mulberry-coloured livery, who had a large, sallow, ugly face, very sunken eyes, and a gigantic head, from which depended a quantity of lank black hair. "You're a rum 'un," thought Mr. Weller. The man kept glancing from a hymn-book he was reading to Sam, and from Sam to his hymn-book, as if he wanted to open a conversation. So at last Sam, by way of giving him an opportunity, said with a familiar nod, "How are you, governor?" "I'm happy to say I'm pretty well, sir," said the man. "What's your name, my patriarch?" said Sam. "Job Trotter," said the stranger. "What's yours?" Sam bore in mind his master's caution, and replied, "My name's Walker, my master's name's Wilkins. Will you take a drop of something this morning, Mr. Trotter?" Mr. Trotter acquiesced in this agreeable proposal. "What sort of a place you got?" inquired Sam, as he filled his companion's glass. "Bad," said Job, smacking his lips. "Very bad." "You don't mean that?" said Sam. "I do indeed. Worse than that. My master, Mr. Charles Fitz-Marshall, is going to be married." "No." "Yes, and worse than that, too. He's going to run away with an immense rich heiress from boarding school. If I knew any respectable gentleman who'd take the matter up," continued Mr. Trotter, "I might have some hope of preventing the elopement, but there's some difficulty, Mr. Walker, just the same. I know no gentleman in this strange place, and 10 to 1 if I did, whether he would believe my story." "Come this way," said Sam, suddenly jumping up and grasping the mulberry man by the arm. "My master's the man you want, I see." And after a slight resistance on the part of Job Trotter, Sam led his newly found friend to the apartment of Mr. Pickwick, to whom he presented him, together with a brief summary of the dialogue we have just repeated. "And when," said Mr. Pickwick, "when is this villainous design to be carried into execution? When is this elopement to take place?" "Tonight, sir," replied Job. "Tonight?" exclaimed Mr. Pickwick. "What had better be done?" "Nothing but take him in the very act of eloping," replied Job. Mr. Pickwick agreed. The day wore on, evening came, 10:30 arrived, and it was time for Mr. Pickwick to issue forth on his delicate errand. There was a bright moon, but it was behind the clouds. It was a fine, dry night, but it was most uncommonly dark. Paths, hedges, fields, houses and trees were enveloped in one deep shade. The atmosphere was hot and sultry. The summer lightning quivered faintly on the verge of the horizon, and sound there was none. They found the house concerned, read the brass plate, walked round the wall, and stopped at that portion of it which divided them from the bottom of the garden. "Take hold of my leg," said Pickwick, "and when I say 'over,' raise me gently." "All right, sir," said Sam. Having settled these preliminaries, Mr. Pickwick grasped the top of the wall and gave the word "over," which was very literally obeyed. Whether his body partook in some degree of the elasticity of his mind, or whether Mr. Weller's notions of a gentle push were of a somewhat rougher disposition than Mr. Pickwick's, the immediate effect of his assistance was to jerk that immortal gentleman completely over the wall onto the bed beneath, where after crushing 3 gooseberry bushes in a rose tree, he finally alighted at full length. "You haven't hurt yourself, sir, I hope?" said Sam. "Never mind," said Mr. Pickwick, rising. "It's nothing but a few scratches." "Go away, or we shall be overheard." With stealthy steps Sam Weller departed, leaving Mr. Pickwick alone in the garden. "What a dreadful situation," said Mr. Pickwick, pausing to wipe his brow after this exercise. He looked up at the house. All was dark. They must be gone to bed now. He would try to signal Job Trotter. He walked on tiptoe across the moist gravel and tapped at the door. He held his breath and listened at the keyhole, where Job had told him he would be. No reply. Very odd. Another knock. He listened again. There was a low whispering inside, and then a voice cried, "Who's there?" "That's not Job," thought Mr. Pickwick, hastily drawing himself straight up against the wall again. "It's a woman." He'd scarcely time to form this conclusion when, "Who's there?" screamed a numerous chorus of treble voices from the staircase inside, consisting of a spinster lady of the establishment, 3 teachers, 5 female servants, and 30 boarders, all half-dressed and in a forest of curl papers. Of course Mr. Pickwick didn't say who was there, and then the burden of the chorus changed into, "Lord, I'm so frightened." Finally Mr. Pickwick decided to present himself amongst them. "Ladies, dear ladies," said Mr. Pickwick. "Oh, he says we're dear," cried the oldest and ugliest teacher. "Oh, the wretch! How did you come into our garden?" faltered the housemaid. "Call the lady of the house, and I'll tell her everything, everything," said Mr. Pickwick, exerting his lungs to the utmost pitch. "Call her, only be quiet and call her, and you shall hear everything." It was proposed, as a test of Mr. Pickwick's sincerity, that he should immediately submit to personal restraint, and that gentleman, having consented to hold a conference with the lady of the house, Miss Tomkins, from the interior of a closet in which the day boarders hung their bonnets and sandwich bags, he at once stepped into it of his own accord and was securely locked up. "I came to warn you that one of your young ladies was going to elope tonight," said Mr. Pickwick from the interior of the closet when the lady had arrived. "Elope?" exclaimed Miss Tomkins, the 3 teachers, the 30 boarders, and the 5 servants. "Who with?" "Your friend, Mr. Charles Fitzmarshall." "My friend? I don't know any such person." "Well, Mr. Jingle, then." "I never heard the name in my life." "Then I have been deceived and deluded," said Mr. Pickwick. "I've been the victim of a conspiracy, a foul and base conspiracy." A very brief conversation ensued. The door was unlocked. Mr. Pickwick stepped out of the closet and found himself in the presence of Mr. Samuel Weller. Mr. Pickwick's explanation, having already been partially made, was soon concluded. But neither in the course of his walk home with his friends, nor afterwards, when seated before a blazing fire at the supper he so much needed, could a single observation be drawn from him. The following day, Mr. Snodgrass, Mr. Winkle, and Mr. Tupman arrived to join their illustrious leader. Sam Weller was standing at the door ready to receive them, and by that gentleman they were ushered to the apartment of Mr. Pickwick, where, to the no small surprise of Mr. Winkle and Mr. Snodgrass, and the no small embarrassment of Mr. Tupman, they found old Wardle with a friend of his, Mr. Trundle. "Well, and how are you, my fine fellows?" said the old gentleman, shaking hands with Mr. Winkle and Mr. Snodgrass at the same time. "I've just been telling Pickwick that we must have you all down at Christmas. We're going to have a wedding, a real wedding this time." "A wedding?" exclaimed Mr. Snodgrass, turning very pale. "Yes, a wedding, but don't be frightened," said the good-humoured old man. "It's only Trundle there, and Bella." "Oh, is that all?" said Mr. Snodgrass, relieved from a painful doubt which had fallen heavily on his breast, that it might be the young lady with the dark eyes who had already made an impression on him, Miss Emily Wardle. "Give you joy, sir." Such felicitations would probably have gone on for some time, had not the entrance of Sam with a letter for Mr. Pickwick caused them to break off. "I don't know this hand," said Mr. Pickwick, opening the letter. "Mercy on us, what's this? It must be a jest. It can't be true." Mr. Tupman, with a trembling voice, read the letter. "Sir, having been instructed by Mrs. Martha Bardell to commence an action against you for breach of promise of marriage, for which the plaintiff lays her damages at £1,500, we beg to inform you that a writ has been issued against you in this suit in the Court of Common Pleas, and request to know by return of post the name of your attorney in London who will accept service thereof. We are, sir, your obedient servants, Dodson and Fogg." "It's a conspiracy," said Mr. Pickwick. "Who ever heard me address her in any way but that in which a lodger would address his landlady? Who ever saw me with her? Not even my friends here." "Except on one occasion," said Mr. Tupman. Mr. Pickwick changed colour. "Gracious powers," he ejaculated, as the recollection of the scene in question struck forcibly upon him. "What a dreadful instance of the force of circumstances! I'll have it explained, though," he continued. "I'll see this Dodson and Fogg. I'll go to London at once." Mr. Pickwick, accompanied by Sam Weller, set out immediately. No sooner had his coach arrived in London than he ordered a cab to the offices of Messrs. Dodson and Fogg. He found them in the ground-floor front of a dingy house at the very furthest end of Freeman's Court, Cornhill, where he addressed himself to Mr. Fogg. "Take a seat, sir," said Mr. Fogg. "There's the paper, sir. My partner will be here directly, and we can converse about this matter, sir." Mr. Pickwick took a seat and the paper, but instead of reading the letter, peeped over the top of it, and took a survey of the man of business, who was an elderly, pimply-faced, vegetable-diet sort of man, in a black coat, dark mixture trousers, and small black gaiters, a kind of being who seemed to be an essential part of the desk at which he was writing, and to have as much thought or sentiment. After a few minutes' silence, Mr. Dodson, a plump, portly, stern-looking man with a loud voice, appeared, and the conversation commenced. "This is Mr. Pickwick," said Fogg. "I came, gentlemen," said Mr. Pickwick, gazing placidly on the two partners. "I came here, gentlemen, to express the surprise with which I received your letter of the other day, and to inquire what grounds of action you have against me." "For the grounds of action, sir," said Dodson, with moral elevation in his air, "you will consult your own conscience and your own feelings. We, sir, are guided entirely by the statement of our client." "I am to understand, then," said Mr. Pickwick, "that it really is your intention to proceed with this action?"
"Understand, sir, that you certainly may," replied Dodson, with something as near a smile as his importance would allow. "Very well, gentlemen, very well," said Mr. Pickwick, rising in person and wrath at the same time. "You shall hear from my solicitor, gentlemen." And without the slightest ceremony, he left. Mr. Pickwick walked abstractedly, crossed opposite the mansion house, and bent his steps up Cheapside. Sam began to wonder where they were going, when his master turned round and said, "Sam, I will go immediately to Mr. Perker's, but first, as I've been rather ruffled, I should like a glass of brandy and water, warm. Where can I have it, Sam?" Mr. Weller's knowledge of London was extensive and peculiar. Mr. Pickwick observed his valet's directions implicitly, and they soon found themselves in a tavern where the hot brandy and water was speedily placed before him, while Mr. Weller, seated at a respectful distance, though at the same table with his master, was accommodated with a pint of porter. The room was one of a very homely description, and was apparently under the especial patronage of stage-coachmen, for several gentlemen who had all the appearances of belonging to that learned profession were drinking and smoking in the different boxes. Among the number was one stout, red-faced, elderly man in particular, seated in an opposite box, who attracted Mr. Pickwick's attention. The stout man was smoking with great vehemence, but between every half-dozen puffs he took his pipe from his mouth and looked first at Mr. Weller and then at Mr. Pickwick. "Who's that, Sam?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "Why, I wouldn't have believed it, sir," replied Mr. Weller with astonished eyes. "It's the old un." "Old one?" said Mr. Pickwick. "What old one?" "My father, sir," replied Mr. Weller. "How are you, my ancient house mother-in-law?" "Why, I'll tell you what, Sammy," said Mr. Weller senior, with much solemnity in his manner, "there never was a nicer woman as a widder than that 'ere second wenture of mine. A sweet creature she was, Sammy. All I can say on her now is that as she was such an uncommon pleasant widder, it's a great pity she ever changed her condition. She don't act as a wife, Sammy." "Don't she, though?" inquired Mr. Weller junior. "I done it once too often, Sammy. I done it once too often. Take example by your father, my boy, and be very careful of widders all your life, especially if they kept a public house, Sammy." Having delivered this parental advice with great pathos, Mr. Weller senior refilled his pipe from a tin box, while his son proceeded to relate in as few words as possible how he had fallen a ready dupe to the stratagems of Job Trotter. Mr. Weller listened to the tale with the most profound attention, and at its termination said, "Weren't one of these chaps slim and tall, with long hair, and the gift of the gab very galloping?" Mr. Pickwick did not quite understand the last item of description, but comprehending the first, said yes at a venture. "T'other's a black-haired chap in mulberry livery, with a very large head?" Yes, he is," said Mr. Pickwick and Sam with great earnestness. "Then I know where they are, and that's all about it," said Mr. Weller. "They're at Ipswich, safe enough, them two." As they soon learned that Mr. Perker was out of town on business for a while, Mr. Pickwick and Sam quickly agreed to accompany Mr. Weller senior to Ipswich, and the following day found them at Mr. Weller's coach ready to head in that direction. "Fine morning, sir," said Mr. Weller senior. "Beautiful indeed," replied Mr. Pickwick. "Beautiful indeed," echoed a red-haired man with an inquisitive nose and blue spectacles, who had unpacked himself from a cab at the same moment as Mr. Pickwick. "Going to Ipswich, sir?" "I am," replied Mr. Pickwick. "Extraordinary coincidence. So am I. What's your name, sir?" "Here is my card, sir," replied Mr. Pickwick, much amused by the abruptness of the question and the singular manner of the stranger. "Ah," said the red-haired man, placing the card in his pocket-book. "Pickwick. Very good. I like to know a man's name. Saves so much trouble. That's my card, sir. Magnus, you will perceive, sir. Magnus is my name. It's rather a good name, I think, sir." "A very good name indeed," replied Mr. Pickwick, and away went the coach up Whitechapel, to the admiration of the whole population.
It was at the door of the Great White House Tavern in Ipswich that the London coach stopped at the same hour every evening. And it was from this same London coach that Mr. Pickwick, Sam Weller, and Mr. Peter Magnus dismounted on the particular evening to which this chapter of our history bears reference. Later, when the dinner was cleared away, Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Peter Magnus drew their chairs up to the fire, and having ordered a bottle of the worst possible port wine at the highest possible price for the good of the house, drank brandy and water for their own. "And what do you think, Mr. Pickwick, I have come down here for?" said Mr. Magnus. "Upon my word," said Mr. Pickwick, "it's wholly impossible for me to guess. On business, perhaps?" "He," said Mr. Peter Magnus, with a bashful titter. "What should you think, Mr. Pickwick, if I'd come down here to make a proposal, sir, eh? "Think? That you are very likely to succeed," replied Mr. Pickwick with one of his beaming smiles. It being past 12, Mr. Pickwick took his leave of Mr. Magnus, and a chambermaid escorted him to his room. Mr. Pickwick began to undress, when he recollected that he had left his favourite watch on the table downstairs. As it was pretty late now, and he was unwilling to ring his bell at that hour of the night, he slipped on his coat, of which he just divested himself, and taking a candlestick in his hand, walked quietly downstairs. The more stairs Mr. Pickwick went down, the more stairs there seemed to be to descend. At last he beheld his missing property on the table, seized the watch in triumph, and proceeded to retrace his steps to his bedchamber. If his progress downward had been attended with difficulties and uncertainty, his journey back was infinitely more perplexing. He was reduced to the verge of despair when an open door attracted his attention. He peeped in, right at last. Having carefully drawn the curtains of his bed on the outside, Mr. Pickwick leisurely divested himself of his shoes and gaiters. He then took off and folded up his coat, waistcoat, and neckcloth, and smiling till he almost cracked the nightcap strings, drew on his tasselled nightcap. The smile that played on Mr. Pickwick's features was instantaneously lost in a look of the most unbounded and wonder-stricken surprise. A person had come in so suddenly and with so little noise that Mr. Pickwick had had no time to call out or oppose their entrance. Who could it be? A robber? Keeping the curtains carefully closed with his hand so that nothing more of him could be seen than his face and nightcap, and putting on his spectacles, he mustered up courage and looked out. Mr. Pickwick almost fainted with horror and dismay. Standing before the dressing-glass was a middle-aged lady in yellow curl papers, busily engaged in brushing what ladies call their back hair. "Wretch," said the lady, covering her eyes with her hands, "what do you want here?" "Nothing, ma'am. Nothing whatever, ma'am," said Mr. Pickwick earnestly. "It is evident to me now that I've mistaken this bedroom for my own. I'd not been here 5 minutes, ma'am, when you suddenly entered it." "If this improbable story be really true, sir," said the lady, sobbing violently, "you will leave it instantly." "Immediately, ma'am. This instant, ma'am," said Mr. Pickwick. "I trust, ma'am, that my unblemished character and the devoted respect I entertain for your sex will plead as some slight excuse for this." But before Mr. Pickwick could conclude his sentence, the lady had thrust him into the passage and locked and bolted the door behind him. He had no resource but to remain where he was until daylight appeared. So after groping his way a few paces down the passage, and to his infinite alarm stumbling over several pairs of boots in so doing, Mr. Pickwick crouched into a little recess in the wall to wait for morning as philosophically as he might. It was the following day, and Mr. Samuel Weller, having taken leave of his father, walked forth from the Great White Horse, and bending his steps towards St. Clement's Church, endeavoured to dissipate his melancholy by strolling among its ancient precincts. Mr. Weller had been staring up at the old brick houses, now and then, in his deep abstraction, bestowing a wink upon some healthy-looking servant girl as she drew up a blind or threw open a bedroom window, when the green gate of a garden at the bottom of the yard opened, and a man having emerged therefrom, closed the green gate very carefully after him, and walked briskly towards the very spot where Mr. Weller was standing.
"Hello, you, sir!"
shouted Sam fiercely. The stranger stopped.
"What have you got to say to me afore I knock your head off?"
said Mr. Weller, addressing Job Trotter, for it was he.
"Hey, Mr. Walker," said Mr. Trotter, with a look of virtuous surprise. "Don't call me Walker, my name's Weller, you know that well enough. Is that master of yourn here?" asked Sam.
"Oh, yeah, he's here, and I grieve to say, Mr. Weller, he's going on worse than ever."
"At the house with the green gate?"
said Sam, eyeing his companion closely.
No, not there," replied Job, with a quickness very unusual to him. Not there."
"What was you doing there?" asked Sam with a sharp glance.
"Got inside the gate by accident, I suppose."
"Why, Mr. Weller," replied Job, I don't mind telling you my little secrets. In the house with the green gate is a cook who has saved up a little money, Mr. Weller, and is desirous, if she can establish herself in life, to open a little shop in the chandlery way, you see. I got a little intimate with her, and from that an acquaintance sprang up between us, and I may venture to say, Mr. Weller, that I am to be the chandler."
"Ah, and a very amiable chandler you'll make," replied Sam, eyeing Job with a side look of intense dislike.
"Well," said Sam, as they had now arrived near the hotel, "I want to have a little bit of a talk with you, Job. So if you're not particular engaged, I should like to see you at the Great White Horse tonight, somewheres about 8 o'clock." "I shall be sure to come," said Job. Wringing Sam's hand with the utmost fervour, he walked away while Mr. Weller made the best of his way to his master's bedroom. "It's all in training, sir," said Sam, and as he assisted Mr. Pickwick to dress, he detailed the plan of action on which he proposed to enter. "But when is this to be done, Sam?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "All in good time, sir," replied Sam. "All in good time." When Mr. Pickwick descended to the room in which he and Mr. Peter Magnus had spent the preceding evening, he found that gentleman pacing up and down the room in a state of the utmost excitement and agitation. "Good morning, sir," said Mr. Magnus. "Mr. Pickwick, I have sent up my card." "Have you?" said Mr. Pickwick. "And the waiter brought back word that she would see me at 11. At 11, sir. He only wants a quarter now. I beg your pardon, Mr. Pickwick, but have you ever done this sort of thing in your time?" said Mr. Magnus. "You mean proposing?" said Mr. Pickwick. "Yes." "Never," said Mr. Pickwick with great energy. "Never." "You have no idea, then, how it's best to begin?" said Mr. Magnus. "Why," said Mr. Pickwick, "I should commence, sir, with a tribute to the lady's beauty and excellent qualities. From them, sir, I should diverge to my own unworthiness. I should then, sir, come to the plain and simple question, will you have me?" Mr. Magnus started, gazed on Mr. Pickwick's intelligent face for a short time in silence, and then shook him warmly by the hand, and rushed desperately from the room. Mr. Pickwick had taken a few strides to and fro, and the small hand of the clock, following the latter part of his example, had arrived at the figure which indicates the half-hour, when the door suddenly opened. He turned round to meet Mr. Peter Magnus, and encountered in his stead the joyous face of Mr. Tupman, the serene countenance of Mr. Winkle, and the intellectual lineaments of Mr. Snodgrass. As Mr. Pickwick greeted them, Mr. Magnus tripped into the room. "Mr. Pickwick," he said, "she's mine." "I congratulate you with all my heart," replied Mr. Pickwick, warmly shaking his new friend by the hand. "You must see her, sir," said Mr. Magnus. "This way, if you please. Excuse us for one instant, gentlemen." Hurrying on in this way, Mr. Peter Magnus drew Mr. Pickwick from the room. He paused at the next door in the passage and tapped gently thereat. "Come in," said a female voice, and in they went. "Miss Witherfield," said Mr. Magnus, "allow me to introduce my very particular friend, Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Pickwick, I beg to make you known to Miss Witherfield."
The lady was at the upper end of the room. As Mr. Pickwick bowed, he took his spectacles from his waistcoat pocket and put them on, a process which he had no sooner gone through than, uttering an exclamation of surprise, Mr. Pickwick retreated several paces, and the lady, with a half-suppressed scream, hid her face in her hands and dropped into a chair. He at once recognized in the future Mrs. Magnus the lady into whose room he had so unwarrantably intruded on the previous night. "Miss Witherfield," said Mr. Peter Magnus, "do you know this person?" "I have seen him," replied the middle-aged lady. "Upon my word, ma'am," said Mr. Magnus, "considering the situation in which I am placed with regard to yourself, you carry this matter off with tolerable coolness, ma'am." "Cruel, Mr. Magnus," said the middle-aged lady, and here she wept, very copiously indeed. Words ran high and voices higher, and at length Mr. Magnus told Mr. Pickwick that he should hear from him, to which Mr. Pickwick replied with laudable politeness that the sooner he heard from him the better, whereupon the middle-aged lady rushed in terror from the room, out of which Mr. Tupman dragged Mr. Pickwick, leaving Mr. Peter Magnus to himself and meditation. If the middle-aged lady had mingled much with the busy world, or had profited at all by the manners and customs of those who make the laws and set the fashions, she would have known that this sort of ferocity is the most harmless thing in nature. But at length she determined to repair to the house of the principal magistrate of the town, and request him to secure the persons of Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Tupman without delay. Now George Nupkins, Esquire, the principal magistrate aforementioned, was as grand a personage as the fastest walker would find out between sunrise and sunset on the 21st of June. He sent his men at once to restrain the two culprits, by force if necessary. Mr. Weller was returning in a rather desponding state from an unsuccessful survey of the mysterious house with the green gate, when, raising his eyes, he beheld a crowd pouring down the street, surrounding an object which had very much the appearance of a sedan chair with Mr. Pickwick inside it. Violent was Mr. Weller's indignation as the sedan chair was borne along, but Mr. Weller's anger quickly gave way to curiosity when the procession turned down the identical courtyard in which he'd met with the runaway Job Trotter. A mighty pull was given at the bell handle which hung at the side of the same green gate. The ring was answered by a very smart and pretty-faced servant girl, and Mr. Pickwick and his friends were shortly ushered into the worshipful presence of Mr. Nupkins. After considerable debate, Mr. Pickwick, with a smile mantling on his again good-humoured countenance, stepped forward and said, "I beg the magistrate's pardon, but may I request a few minutes' private conversation with him on a matter of deep importance to himself?" Mr. Nupkins led the way into a small room which opened into the justice parlour. "I will come to the point at once, sir," said Mr. Pickwick. "It affects yourself and your credit materially. I have every reason to believe, sir, that you are harbouring in your house a gross impostor." "Two," interrupted Sam. "A strolling actor and a wolf in a mulberry suit. Very true, sir." And Mr. Pickwick proceeded to pour into the horror-stricken ear of Mr. Nupkins an abridged account of Mr. Jingle's atrocities. As the narrative proceeded, all the warm blood in the body of Mr. Nupkins tingled up into the very tips of his ears. He had picked up the man at a neighbouring racecourse, charmed with his long list of aristocratic acquaintance, his extensive travel, and his fashionable demeanour. Mrs. Nupkins and Miss Nupkins had exhibited Captain Fitzmarshall, and quoted Captain Fitzmarshall, and hurled Captain Fitzmarshall at the devoted heads of their select circle of acquaintance. "Confront me with him," said Mr. Pickwick. "That's all I ask and all I require. Confront him with me and my friends here, and you will want no further proof." That evening Mr. Pickwick dined with Mr. Nupkins, while his manservant, Mr. Muzzle, conducted Sam Weller into the kitchen. "Mary," said Mr. Muzzle to the pretty servant girl, "this is Mr. Weller. A gentleman as master's sent down to be made as comfortable as possible." "How are you, ma'am?" said Mr. Weller. "Welly glad to see you indeed, and I hope our acquaintance may be a long un, as the gentleman said to the £5 note." When this ceremony of introduction had been gone through, the cook and Mary retired into the back kitchen to titter for 10 minutes. Then, returning, all giggles and blushes, they sat down to dinner. Mr. Weller's easy manners and conversational powers had such irresistible influence with his new friends that before the dinner was half over they were on a footing of perfect intimacy and in possession of a full account of the delinquency of Job Trotter. Mr. Weller was in the height of his attentions to the pretty housemaid, Mr. Muzzle was busy doing the honours of the table, and the cook had just paused to laugh in the very act of raising a huge morsel to her lips, when the kitchen door opened and in walked Mr. Job Trotter himself. Catching sight of Mr. Weller, he involuntarily shrank back a pace or two, and stood gazing on the unexpected scene before him, perfectly motionless with amazement and terror. "Here he is," said Sam, rising with great glee. "Why, we were at that very moment of speaking of you. How are you? Where you been? Come in." At that moment the bell rang. "That's for you, Job Trotter," said Sam, and before Mr. Trotter could offer remonstrance or reply, Sam seized one arm and Mr. Muzzle the other, and one pulling before and the other pushing behind, they conveyed him up the stairs and into the parlour. It was an impressive tableau. Alfred Jingle, Esquire, alias Captain Fitzmarshall, was standing near the door with his hat in his hand and a smile on his face, wholly unmoved by his very unpleasant situation. Confronting him stood Mr. Pickwick, who had evidently been inculcating some high moral lesson. "What prevents me," said Mr. Nupkins, with magisterial dignity, as Job was brought in, "what prevents me from detaining these men as rogues and impostors? It's a foolish mercy, but what prevents me?" "Pride, old fellow, pride," replied Jingle, quite at his ease. He smiled and moved towards the door. "Stay," said Mr. Pickwick. Jingle stopped. "I might," said Mr. Pickwick, "have taken a much greater revenge for the treatment I have experienced at your hands and that of your hypocritical friend there." Job Trotter bowed with great politeness and laid his hand upon his heart. "I say," said Mr. Pickwick, growing gradually angry, "that I might have taken a greater revenge, but I content myself with exposing you, which I consider a duty I owe to society. This is a leniency, sir, which I hope you will remember." "Ha, ha!" said Jingle. "Good fellow, Pickwick, fine heart, stout old boy, but mustn't be passionate. Bad thing, very. Bye-bye. See you again some day. Keep up your spirits. Now, Job, trot." With these words, Mr. Jingle stuck on his hat in the old fashion and strode out of the room. Mr. Pickwick sighed. "Having discharged my duty, sir," said Mr. Pickwick to Mr. Nupkins, "I will, with my friends, bid you farewell." "Get your hat, Sam. It's below stairs, sir," said Sam, and he ran down after it. Now there was nobody in the kitchen but the pretty housemaid, and as Sam's hat was mislaid, he had to look for it, and the pretty housemaid lighted him. Whether it was that her face looked prettier still when it was raised towards Sam's, or whether it was the accidental consequence of their being so near to each other, is a matter of uncertainty to this day. But Sam kissed her. "Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, calling over the banisters. "Come, sir," replied Sam, running upstairs. And this was the first passage of Mr. Weller's first love. End of side 2.
Side 3. Having accomplished the main end and object of his journey by the exposure of Jingle, Mr. Pickwick resolved on immediately returning to London with the view of becoming acquainted with the proceedings which had been taken against him in the meantime by Messrs. Dodson and Fogg. An interview with Mr. Perker confirmed that the action was not to be tried for several weeks, and Mr. Pickwick was fain to prepare for his Christmas visit to Dingley Dell with the pleasant anticipation that some 2 or 3 months afterwards an action brought against him for damages sustained by reason of a breach of promise of marriage would be publicly tried in the Court of Common Pleas. Sam, meanwhile, took advantage of his leave and planted himself on top of the Arundel coach and journeyed on to visit his father at the Marquis of Granby in Dorking. The Marquis of Granby in Mrs. Weller's time was quite a model of a roadside public house of the better class, just large enough to be convenient and small enough to be snug. "Now then," said a shrill female voice, the instant Sam thrust his head in the door, "what do you want, young man?" Sam looked round in the direction whence the voice proceeded. It came from a rather stout lady of comfortable appearance, who was seated beside the fireplace in the bar, blowing the fire to make the kettle boil for tea. She was not alone, for on the other side of the fireplace, sitting bolt upright in a high-backed chair, was a man in threadbare black clothes, with a back almost as long and stiff as that of the chair itself, who caught Sam's most particular and especial attention at once. He was a prim-faced, red-nosed man with a long, thin countenance and a semi-rattlesnake sort of eye, rather sharp and decidedly bad. "Mother-in-law," said Sam, "how are you?" "Why, I do believe he's a Weller," said his stepmother, raising her eyes to Sam's face with no very gratified expression of countenance. "And how's father?" said Sam. At this inquiry, Mrs. Weller raised her hands and turned up her eyes, as if the subject were too painful to be alluded to. The Reverend Stiggins, her friend, groaned. Sam felt very disposed to give the Reverend Mr. Stiggins something to groan for, but he repressed his inclination and sat down to tea. The tea things had been scarcely put away and the hearth swept up, when the London coach deposited Mr. Weller senior at the door, his legs deposited him in the bar, and his eyes showed him his son. "What, Sammy!" exclaimed the father. "What, old Nobs!" ejaculated the son, and they shook hands heartily. "Oh, you wretch!" said Mrs. Weller. "Thank ye, my love," said Mr. Weller. "Come, come, father," said Sam. "None of these little lovin's afore strangers." Mr. Weller drew his chair sullenly into the chimney corner, and the rest of the conversation was confined to Mrs. Weller and the Reverend Mr. Stiggins, and the topics principally descanted on were the virtues of the shepherd, the worthiness of his flock, and the high crimes and misdemeanours of everybody beside. Sam was up betimes the next day, and having partaken of a hasty breakfast, prepared to return to London. He had scarcely set foot without the house when his father stood before him. "Going, Sammy?" inquired Mr. Weller. "Off at once," replied Sam. "I wish you'd muffle that 'ere Stiggins and take him with you," said Mr. Weller. "I'm ashamed on you," said Sam reproachfully. "What do you let him show his red nose at the Marquis of Granby at all for?" Mr. Weller the elder fixed on his son an earnest look and replied,
'Cause I'm a married man, Samivel, 'cause I'm a married man. I've only got to say this here, said Sam, that if I was the proprietor of the Marquis of Granby and that here Stiggins came and made toast in my bar, I'd— What? Interposed Mr. Weller with great anxiety. What? Poison is rum and water, said Sam. The elder Mr. Weller bestowed a look of deep, unspeakable admiration on his son, and having once more grasped his hand, walked slowly away, revolving in his mind the numerous reflections to which his advice had given rise. On the other side of London, as brisk as bees, if not altogether as light as fairies, did the 4 Pickwickians assemble on the morning of the 22nd day of December, in the year of grace in which these their faithfully recorded adventures were undertaken and accomplished, in order to spend Christmas at Dingley Dell and assist in the wedding of Trundle and the lovely Bella. A wedding is a licensed subject to joke upon, but there really is no great joke in the matter after all. We speak merely of the ceremony, and beg it to be distinctly understood that we indulge in no hidden sarcasm upon married life. Let us briefly say, then, that the ceremony was performed by an old clergyman in the parish of Dingley Dell, and that Mr. Pickwick's name is attached to the register, still preserved in the vestry thereof, that the young lady with the black eyes, Miss Arabella Allen, who had very much caught the attention of Mr. Winkle, signed her name in a very unsteady and tremulous manner, that Emily's signature, as the other bridesmaid, is nearly illegible, that it all went off in very admirable style, that the young ladies generally thought it far less shocking than they had expected, and that although the owner of the black eyes and the arch smile, Miss Allen, informed Mr. Winkle that she was sure she could never submit to anything so dreadful, we have the very best reasons for thinking she was mistaken. "Well, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, as that favoured servitor entered his bedchamber with his warm water on the morning after the wedding, "still frosty?" "There's a couple of sawbones downstairs," said Sam. "A couple of what?" exclaimed Mr. Pickwick, sitting up in bed. "I thought everybody knowed as a sawbones was a surgeon," said Sam. "These here ones as is below, though, ain't regular thoroughbred sawbones, they're only in training." "In other words, they're medical students, I suppose," said Mr. Pickwick. Sam Weller nodded his assent. Mr. Pickwick, at the expiration of a quarter of an hour, went down to breakfast, where he had an opportunity of glancing at both Mr. Benjamin Allen and his friend Mr. Bob Sawyer. Mr. Benjamin Allen was a coarse, stout, thick-set young man, with black hair cut rather short and a white face cut rather long. He was embellished with spectacles and wore a white neckerchief. He presented altogether rather a mildewy appearance, and emitted a fragrant odour of full-flavoured cubas. Mr. Bob Sawyer, who was habited in a coarse blue coat, which without being either a greatcoat or a surtout, partook of the nature and qualities of both, had about him that sort of slovenly smartness and swaggering gait that made him look upon the whole something rather like a dissipated Robinson Crusoe. Such were the two worthies to whom Mr. Pickwick was introduced as he took his seat at the breakfast table on Christmas morning. "Splendid morning, gentlemen," said Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Bob Sawyer slightly nodded his assent to the proposition, and asked Mr. Benjamin Allen for the mustard. "Have you come far this morning, gentlemen?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "Blue Lion at Muggleton," briefly responded Mr. Allen. "You should have joined us last night," said Mr. Pickwick. "So we should," replied Bob Sawyer, "but the brandy was too good to leave in a hurry, wasn't it, Ben?" "Certainly," said Mr. Benjamin Allen. "The cigars were not bad, or the pork chops either, were they, Bob?" "Hush, hush, gentlemen, pray," said Mr. Pickwick. "I hear the ladies." As Mr. Pickwick spoke, the ladies, gallantly escorted by Messrs. Snodgrass, Winkle and Tupman, returned from an early walk. "Why, Ben," said Arabella, in a tone which expressed more surprise than pleasure at the sight of her brother. "Come to take you home tomorrow," replied Benjamin. Mr. Winkle turned pale. "Don't you see Bob Sawyer, Arabella?" inquired Mr. Benjamin Allen, somewhat reproachfully. Arabella gracefully held out her hand in acknowledgment of Bob Sawyer's presence. A thrill of hatred struck to Mr. Winkle's heart as Bob Sawyer inflicted on the proffered hand a perceptible squeeze. Then the whole train went to church. where Mr. Benjamin Allen fell fast asleep, while Mr. Bob Sawyer abstracted his thoughts from worldly matters by the ingenious process of carving his name on the seat of the pew in corpulent letters of 4 inches long. The jovial party broke up the next morning. Breakings up are capital things in our school days, but in afterlife they are painful enough. Death, self-interest, and fortune's changes are every day breaking up many a happy group and scattering them far and wide, and the boys and girls never come back again. We do not mean to say that it was exactly the case in this particular instance. All we wish to inform the reader is that the different members of the party dispersed to their several homes. Once more in London, Mr. Pickwick paid a visit to Mr. Perker. "Ah, my dear sir," said little Mr. Perker, bustling up from his chair. "Well, my dear sir, and what's the news about your matter, eh? Anything more about our friends in Freeman's Court? They've not been sleeping, I know that. Aha, they're very smart fellows, very smart indeed." "Suppose the verdict is against me," said Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Perker smiled, took a very long pinch of snuff, stirred the fire, shrugged his shoulders, and remained expressively silent. "You mean in that case I must pay the damages?" said Mr. Pickwick, who had watched this telegraphic answer with considerable sternness. Perker gave the fire another very unnecessary poke and said, "I'm afraid so." "Then I beg to announce to you my unalterable determination to pay no damages whatever," said Mr. Pickwick most emphatically. "None, Mr. Perker, not a pound, not a penny of my money shall find its way into the pockets of Dodson and Fogg. This is my deliberate and irrevocable determination." Mr. Pickwick gave a heavy blow on the table before him in confirmation of the irrevocability of his intention. "Very well, my dear sir." "Very well," said Mr. Perker. "You know best, of course." The day of the trial came, and Mr. Pickwick sat with his friends awaiting the dreaded moment when he would be presented before the judge. "I wonder what the foreman of the jury, whoever he'll be, has got for breakfast," said Mr. Snodgrass, by way of keeping up a conversation on the eventful morning. "Ah," said Mr. Perker, "I hope he's got a good one." "Why so?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "Highly important, very important, my dear sir," replied Mr. Perker. "A good, contented, well-breakfasted juryman is a capital thing to get hold of. Discontented or hungry jurymen, my dear sir, always find for the plaintiff." "Bless my heart," said Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Pickwick took his place in court. The judge had no sooner taken his seat than the officer of the floor of the court called out "Silence" in a commanding tone, and immediately afterwards Mrs. Bardell, supported by her neighbour, Mrs. Cluppins, was led in and placed in a drooping state at the other end of the seat on which Mr. Pickwick sat. "Very good notion, that, indeed," whispered Perker to Mr. Pickwick. "Capital fellows, those Dodson and Fogg. Excellent ideas of effect, my dear sir, excellent." Dodson and Fogg had taken as their associate in the case a certain Sergeant Buzzfuzz, who began by saying that never from the very first moment of his applying himself to the study and practice of the law had he approached a case with feelings of such deep emotion or with such a heavy sense of the responsibility imposed upon him, a responsibility, he would say, which he could never have supported were he not buoyed up and sustained by a conviction so strong that it amounted to positive certainty that the cause of truth and justice, or, in other words, the cause of his much injured and most oppressed client, must prevail with the high-minded and intelligent dozen of men whom he now saw in that box before him. After several witnesses and much discussion, Mr. Nathaniel Winkle was called for. "Here," replied a feeble voice. Mr. Winkle entered the witness box, and having been duly sworn, bowed to the judge with considerable deference. "Don't look at me, sir," said the judge sharply, in acknowledgment of the salute. "Look at the jury." Mr. Pickwick's case
had not gone off in so particularly happy a manner up to this point that it could very well afford to have any additional suspicion cast upon it. But as it could afford to be placed in a rather better light, if possible, Mr. Perker's man, Mr. Funky, rose for the purpose of getting something important out of Mr. Winkle in cross-examination. Whether he did get anything important out of him will immediately appear. "I believe, Mr. Winkle," said Mr. Funky, "that Mr. Pickwick is not a young man." "Oh, no," replied Mr. Winkle, "old enough to be my father." "You have known Mr. Pickwick a long time. Had you ever any reason to suppose or believe that he was about to be married?" "Oh, no, certainly not," replied Mr. Winkle, with too much eagerness. Lawyers hold that there are two kinds of particularly bad witnesses, a reluctant witness and a too willing witness. It was Mr. Winkle's fate to figure in both characters. "I will go even further than this, Mr. Winkle," continued Mr. Funky in a most smooth and complacent manner. "Did you ever see anything in Mr. Pickwick's manner and conduct towards the opposite sex to induce you to believe that he ever contemplated matrimony of late years in any case?" "Oh, no, certainly not," replied Mr. Winkle. "Has his behaviour, when females have been in the case, always been that of a man who, having attained a pretty advanced period of life, content with his own occupations and amusements, treats them only as a father might his daughters?" "Not the least doubt of it," replied Mr. Winkle, in the fullness of his heart. "You have never known anything in his behaviour towards Mrs. Bardell or any other female in the least degree suspicious?" said Mr. Funky, preparing to sit down. No," replied Mr. Winkle, "except on one trifling occasion, which I have no doubt might be easily explained." Now, if the unfortunate Mr. Funky had sat down, or stopped this irregular cross-examination at the outset, this unfortunate admission would not have been elicited. Amid the profound silence of the whole court, Mr. Winkle faltered out that the trifling circumstance of suspicion was Mr. Pickwick's being found in a lady's sleeping apartment at midnight, which had terminated, he believed, in the breaking off of the projected marriage of the lady in question. "You may leave the box, sir," said the judge. Mr. Winkle did leave the box, and rushed with delirious haste to the George and Vulture, where he was discovered some hours after by the waiter, groaning in a hollow and dismal manner, with his head buried beneath the sofa cushions. All hope was now lost for Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Justice Starely summed up in the old established and most approved form. He read as much of his notes to the jury as he could decipher on so short a notice, and made running comments on the evidence as he went along. The jury then retired to their private room to talk the matter over, and the judge retired to his private room to refresh himself with a mutton chop and a glass of sherry. An anxious quarter of an hour elapsed. The jury came back. The judge was fetched in. Mr. Pickwick put on his spectacles and gazed at the foreman with agitated countenance and a quickly beating heart. "Gentlemen," said an individual in black, "are you all agreed upon your verdict?" "We are," replied the foreman. "Do you find for the plaintiff, gentlemen, or for the defendant?" "For the plaintiff." "With what damages, gentlemen?" £750. Mr. Pickwick took off his spectacles, carefully wiped the glasses, folded them into their case, put them in his pocket, and followed Mr. Perker out of the court. He encountered Messrs. Dodson and Fogg, rubbing their hands with every token of outward satisfaction. "Well, gentlemen," said Mr. Pickwick, "you may try and try and try again, but not one farthing of costs or damages do you ever get from me if I have to spend the rest of my existence in a debtor's prison." Then, speechless with indignation, Mr. Pickwick allowed himself to be led from the court. Having been informed by Mr. Perker that he had 2 months of liberty before Dodson and Fogg could issue execution for the amount of the damages and taxed costs, Mr. Pickwick said, "Very good. Until that time, my dear fellow, let me hear no more of the matter. Now, where shall we go next?"
Sam was at once dispatched to the White Horse Cellar to take 5 places by the 7:30 o'clock coach for Bath next morning. The next was a very unpropitious morning for a journey, muggy, damp, and drizzly. Leaving Sam Weller to rescue the luggage from the 7 or 8 porters who flung themselves savagely upon it the moment the coach stopped, and finding that they were about 20 minutes too early, Mr. Pickwick and his friends went for shelter into the traveller's room, the last resource of human dejection. The traveller's room at the White Horse Cellar is, of course, uncomfortable. It would be no traveller's room if it were not. It is divided into boxes for the solitary confinement of travellers. One of these boxes was occupied on this particular occasion by a stern-eyed man of about 45, who had a bald and glossy forehead with a good deal of black hair at the sides and the back of his head, and large black whiskers. He looked up from his breakfast as Mr. Pickwick entered, with a fierce and peremptory air which was very dignified. "Are you going to Bath?" said the strange man. "I am, sir," replied Mr. Pickwick. "And those other gentlemen?" "They are going also," said Mr. Pickwick. "Not inside?" "I'll be damned if you're going inside," said the strange man. "Not all of us," said Mr. Pickwick. "No, not all of you," said the strange man emphatically. "I've taken 2 places. If they try to squeeze 6 people into an infernal box that holds only 4, I'll take a post-chaise and bring an action." "My good sir," said Mr. Pickwick, "you will allow me to observe that this is a very unnecessary display of excitement. I've only taken places inside for 2. "I'm glad to hear it," said the fierce man. "I withdraw my expressions. I tender an apology. There's my card. Give me your acquaintance." Of course, an interchange of friendly salutations followed this gracious speech, and the fierce gentleman immediately proceeded to inform the friends in the same short, abrupt, jerking sentences that his name was Dowler, that he was going to Bath on pleasure, that he was formerly in the army, that he had now set up in business as a gentleman, that he lived upon the profits, and that the individual for whom the second place was taken was a person no less illustrious than Mrs. Dowler, his lady wife. When Mrs. Dowler arrived, she proved to be a very agreeable and fascinating person, so what between Mrs. Dowler's charms and Mr. Pickwick's good humour and Mr. Winkle's good listening, the insides contrived to be very companionable all the way. As Mr. Pickwick contemplated a stay of at least 2 months in Bath, he deemed it advisable to take private lodgings for himself and friends for that period, and as a favourable opportunity offered for their securing on moderate terms the upper portion of a house in Royal Crescent, which was larger than they required, Mr. and Mrs. Dowler offered to relieve them of a bedroom and a sitting-room. This proposition was at once accepted, and in 3 days' time they were all located in their new abode. One evening, Mr. Pickwick was sitting up by himself after a day spent making entries in his journal, his friends having retired to bed. Mr. Pickwick yawned several times when he had arrived at the end of his work, and went upstairs to bed. He stopped at Mr. Dowler's door according to custom, and knocked to say good night. Then he went to his bedchamber, and Mr. Dowler resumed his seat before the fire in fulfilment of a rash promise to sit up till his wife came home. There are few things more worrying than sitting up for somebody, especially if that somebody be at a party. You cannot help thinking how quickly the time passes with them, which drags so heavily with you. The more you think of this, the more your hopes of their speedy arrival decline. Mr. Dowler made up his mind that he would throw himself on the bed in the back room and think, not sleep, of course. Just as the clock struck 3, there was blown into the Crescent a sedan chair with Mrs. Dowler inside, borne by one short fat chairman and one long thin one, who had had much ado to keep their bodies perpendicular, to say nothing of the chair. But on that high ground, and in the Crescent, which the wind swept round and round as if it were going to tear the paving stones up, its fury was tremendous. They were very glad to set the chair down and give a good, round, loud double knock at the street door. They waited some time, but nobody came. "Rap, rap." Rap, 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 went the knocker.
Mr. Winkle jumped out of bed, wondering very much what could possibly be the matter, and hastily putting on his stockings and slippers, folded his dressing gown round him, lighted a flat candle from the rushlight that was burning in the fireplace, and hurried downstairs. "Here's somebody coming at last, ma'am," said the short chairman. "I wish I was behind him with a bread all," muttered the long one. "Open the door, come, look sharp, timber eyelids." Mr. Winkle, being half asleep, obeyed the command mechanically, opened the door a little and peeped out. The first thing he saw was the red glare of the link boy's torch. Startled by the sudden fear that the house might be on fire, he hastily threw the door wide open, and holding the candle above his head, stared eagerly before him, not quite certain whether what he saw was a sedan chair or a fire engine. At this instant there came a violent gust of wind, the light was blown out, Mr. Winkle felt himself irresistibly impelled onto the steps, and the door blew to with a loud crash. Mr. Winkle plied the knocker with all his might and main. All this time he was shivering with cold. Every time he raised his hand to the knocker, the wind took the dressing-gown in a most unpleasant manner. Suddenly Mr. Winkle saw people coming down the street. "There are ladies with 'em. Cover me up with something. Stand before me," roared Mr. Winkle. He gave a last, hopeless knock. The ladies were only a few doors off. He threw away an extinguished candle which all this time he'd held above his head, and fairly bolted into the sedan chair where Mrs. Dowler was. Now Mr. Pickwick's landlady in Bath, Mrs. Craddock, had heard the knocking and the voices at last. Throwing the window sash, as Mr. Winkle was rushing into the chair, she no sooner caught sight of what was going forward below than she raised a vehement and dismal shriek and implored Mr. Dowler to get up directly, for his wife was running away with another gentleman. Upon this, Mr. Dowler bounced off the bed as abruptly as an india-rubber ball, and rushing into the front room, arrived at the one window just as Mr. Pickwick threw up the other, when the first object that met the gaze of both was Mr. Winkle bolting into the sedan chair. "Watchman!" shouted Dowler furiously. "Stop him! Hold him! Keep him tight! Shut him in till I come down! I'll cut his throat!" But Mr. Winkle didn't wait for him. He no sooner heard the horrible threat of the valorous Dowler than he bounced out of the sedan quite as quickly as he had bounced in, and throwing off his slippers into the road, took to his heels. The ill-starred gentleman, who had been the unfortunate cause of the unusual noise and disturbance which alarmed the inhabitants of the Royal Crescent, after passing a night of great confusion and anxiety, left the roof beneath which his friends still slumbered, bound he knew not whither. Bending his steps towards the Royal Hotel, he found a coach on the point of starting for Bristol, and thinking Bristol as good a place for his purpose as any other he could go to, he mounted the box and soon reached his destination, taking up his quarters at the Bush. Having inspected the docks and shipping and viewed the cathedral, he inquired his way to Clifton. But as the pavements of Bristol are not the widest or cleanest upon earth, so its streets are not altogether the slightest or least intricate. Mr. Winkle, being greatly puzzled by their manifold windings and twistings, looked about him for a decent shop in which he could apply afresh for counsel and instruction. His eye fell upon a newly painted tenement. At the first knock, a sound as of persons fencing with fire-irons, which had until now been very audible, suddenly ceased. At the second, a studious-looking young gentleman in green spectacles with a very large book in his hand glided quietly into the shop and, stepping behind the counter, requested to know the visitor's pleasure. "I'm sorry to trouble you, sir," said Mr. Winkle, "but will you have the goodness to direct me to—" "Ha, ha, ha!" roared the studious young gentleman. "Why, don't you know me?" he said. Mr. Winkle murmured in reply that he had not that pleasure. The medical gentleman kicked the volume with remarkable agility to the further end of the shop, and pulling off his green spectacles, grinned the identical grin of Robert Sawyer, Esquire. "I wonder you didn't see the name," said Bob Sawyer, calling his friend's attention to the outer door, on which in white paint were traced the words, "Sawyer, late Knockamorf." "It never caught my eye," returned Mr. Winkle. "Lord,
"If I'd known who you were, I should have rushed out and caught you in my arms," said Bob Sawyer, "but upon my life I thought you were the king's taxes." "No," said Mr. Winkle. Then, looking around, "What a very nice place you have here. Very snug little business you have, no doubt." "Very," replied Bob Sawyer. "Hardly anything real in the shop but the leeches, and they're second-hand." Mr. Benjamin Allen appeared, and produced from the closet at his elbow a black bottle half full of brandy. Mr. Benjamin Allen had a way of becoming sentimental after brandy. "My dear friend," said Mr. Allen after a few drinks, taking advantage of Mr. Bob Sawyer's temporary absence behind the counter, whither he had retired to dispense some of the second-hand leeches, "my dear friend, I'm very miserable." Mr. Winkle professed his heartfelt regret to hear it, and begged to know whether he could do anything to alleviate the sorrows of the suffering student. "Nothing, my dear boy, nothing," said Ben. "You recollect Arabella, Winkle, my sister Arabella, a little girl, Winkle, with black eyes, when we were down at Wardle's? I don't know whether you happened to notice her. A nice little girl, Winkle. Perhaps my features may recall her to your recollection." Mr. Winkle required nothing to recall the charming Arabella to his mind. "Our friend Bob is a delightful fellow, Winkle," said Mr. Ben Allen. "I designed them for each other. They were made for each other, sent into the world for each other, born for each other." Mr. Allen, after a tear or two, went on to say that notwithstanding all his esteem and respect and veneration for his friend, Arabella had unaccountably and undutifully evinced the most determined antipathy to his person. "And I think," said Mr. Ben Allen in conclusion, "I think there's a prior attachment." He seized the poker, flourished it in a warlike manner above his head. "I show him what I thought of him." All this was, of course, very soothing to the feelings of Mr. Winkle, who remained silent for a few minutes, but at length mustered up resolution to inquire whether Miss Allen was in Kent. "No," said Mr. Ben Allen. "I brought her down into this part of the country to spend a few months at an old aunt's." "Oh, the aunt's in Bristol, is it?" faltered Mr. Winkle. No, not in Bristol," replied Mr. Ben Allen, jerking his thumb over his right shoulder. "Oh, that way, down there." "But hush, here's Bob. Not a word, my dear friend, not a word." Short as this conversation was, it roused in Mr. Winkle the highest degree of excitement and anxiety. The suspected prior attachment rankled in his heart. Could he be the object of it? Could it be for him that the fair Arabella had looked scornfully on the sprightly Bob Sawyer? Or had he a successful rival? He determined to see her, cost what it might, but here an insurmountable objection presented itself. For whether the explanatory over that way and down there of Ben Allen meant 3 miles off or 30 or 300, he could in no wise guess. Pondering this problem, Mr. Winkle took his departure and returned to the bush. The anxiety of his mind, and the numerous meditations which Arabella had awakened, were acute. After taking a glass of soda water and brandy at the bar, he turned into the coffee-room, dispirited rather than elevated by the occurrences of the evening. Sitting in front of the fire, with his back towards him, was a tallish gentleman in a greatcoat, the only other occupant of the room. It was rather a cool evening for the season of the year, and the gentleman drew his chair aside to afford the newcomer a sight of the fire. What were Mr. Winkle's feelings when in doing so he disclosed to view the face and figure of the vindictive and sanguinary Dowler? Mr. Winkle's first impulse was to give a violent pull at the nearest bell handle. He had made one step towards it when Mr. Dowler very hastily drew back. "Mr. Winkle, sir, be calm, don't strike me, I won't bear it. A blow, never," said Mr. Dowler, looking meeker than Mr. Winkle had expected in a gentleman of his ferocity. A blow, sir?" stammered Mr. Winkle. "A blow, sir," replied Dowler. "Compose your feelings, sit down. Relate it all. How did you find me?" As Dowler progressed, Mr. Winkle's countenance grew more and more dignified. The mysterious nature of the commencement of their conversation was explained.
Mr. Dowler had as great an objection to duelling as himself. In short, this blustering and awful personage was one of the most egregious cowards in existence, and interpreting Mr. Winkle's absence through the medium of his own fears, had taken the same step as himself, and prudently retired until all excitement of feeling should have subsided. As the real state of the case dawned upon Mr. Winkle's mind, he looked very terrible, and said he was perfectly satisfied, and the belligerents parted for the night with many protestations of eternal friendship. About 12:30, when Mr. Winkle had been revelling some 20 minutes in the full luxury of his first sleep, he was suddenly awaked by Mr. Samuel Weller, who had tracked him down on Mr. Pickwick's express orders, and was instructed to return with him that very night. "Nonsense, Sam," said Mr. Winkle. "I must stop here 2 or 3 days, and more than that, Sam, you must stop here too, to assist me in gaining an interview with a young lady, Miss Allen." After a great deal of argument and representation on the part of Mr. Winkle, and a full disclosure of what had passed in the interview with Dowler, Sam began to waver, and at length agreed to help Miss Winkle find Miss Arabella Allen. Accordingly, next morning, Sam Weller issued forth on his quest, in no way daunted by the very discouraging prospect before him, and away he walked up one street and down another, when accident all of a sudden threw in his way what he might not have found in a 12-month. Into a long back lane there opened 3 or 4 garden gates belonging to as many houses, which, though detached from each other, were only separated by their gardens. Sam was profoundly turning over in his mind the difficulties of his present undertaking, when a gate opened, and a female servant came into the lane to shake some bedside carpets. Sam was staggered, for in the countenance of the well-shaped female servant he beheld the very features of his Valentine, the pretty housemaid from Mr. Nupkins. "Why, Mary, my dear," said Sam. "Look, Mr. Weller," said Mary, "how you do frighten one." Sam made no verbal answer to this complaint, nor can we precisely say what reply he did make. We merely know that after a short pause Mary said, "Lord, do have done, Mr. Weller," and that his hat had fallen off a few moments before, from both of which tokens we should be disposed to infer that one kiss or more had passed between the parties. Sam explained that he was searching for Miss Arabella Allen. "Miss who?" said Mary in great astonishment. "Miss Arabella Allen," said Sam. "Goodness gracious," said Mary, pointing to a garden door. "Why, it's that very house. She's been living there these 6 weeks." Mr. Weller was so deeply overcome on receiving this intelligence that he found it absolutely necessary to cling to his fair informant for support, and divers little love passages had passed between them before he was sufficiently collected to return to the subject, when it was at last arranged that Mr. Winkle, with Mr. Weller as chaperone, would call on the lady in her garden the following evening. And so it happened. Mr. Winkle stayed not. He dropped from the wall, had thrown himself at Arabella's feet, and by this time was pleading the sincerity of his passion with an eloquence worthy even of Mr. Pickwick himself, before returning with Mr. Weller to the bush. "Beg your pardon, sir," said Sam, touching his hat as Mr. Winkle descended the steps of the coach. "Hope there weren't a prior attachment, sir." Mr. Winkle grasped his humble friend by the hand and whispered in his ear, "It's all right, Sam, quite all right." Upon which Mr. Weller struck 3 distinct blows upon his nose in token of intelligence, smiled, winked, and proceeded to put the steps up with a countenance expressive of lively satisfaction. When Mr. Winkle and Mr. Weller returned to London, the time was come for Mr. Pickwick to surrender himself to the authorities. The usual forms having been gone through, the body of Samuel Pickwick was soon afterwards confided to the custody of the tipstaff, to be taken by him to the warden of the Fleet Prison, and there detained until the amount of damages and costs in the action of Bardell against Pickwick was fully paid and satisfied. After some discussion, it was discovered that one of the turnkeys had a bed to let, which Mr. Pickwick could have for that night. He gladly agreed to hire it. "If you'll come with me,
"I'll show it you at once," said the man. "It ain't a large un, but it's an out-and-outer to sleep in. This way, sir." They passed through the inner gate and descended a short flight of steps. The key was turned after them, and Mr. Pickwick found himself for the first time in his life within the walls of a debtor's prison. The gentleman who had accompanied Mr. Pickwick into the prison turned sharp round to the right when he got to the bottom of the little flight of steps, and led the way through an iron gate which stood open into a long, narrow gallery, dirty and low, paved with stone, and very dimly lighted by a window at each remote end. "This," said the gentleman, thrusting his hands into his pockets and looking carelessly over his shoulder at Mr. Pickwick, "this here is the hall flight." "Oh," replied Mr. Pickwick, looking down a dark and filthy staircase, which appeared to lead to a range of damp and gloomy stone vaults beneath the ground. "And those, I suppose, are the little cellars where prisoners keep their small quantities of coals? Unpleasant places to have to go down to, but very convenient, I dare say." "Yes, I shouldn't wonder if they was convenient," replied the gentleman, "seeing that a few people live here pretty snug. That's the fare, that is." "My friend," said Mr. Pickwick, "you don't really mean to say that human beings live down in those wretched dungeons?" "Don't I?" replied the gentleman with indignant astonishment. "Why shouldn't I?" "Live? Live down there?" exclaimed Mr. Pickwick. "Live down there, yeah, and die down there, too, very often," replied the gentleman. As he turned somewhat fiercely upon Mr. Pickwick in saying this, and moreover muttered in an excited fashion certain unpleasant invocations concerning his own eyes, limbs, and circulating fluids, the latter gentleman deemed it advisable to pursue the discourse no further. The guide, having at length reached another gallery, led the way into a small passage at the extreme end, opened a door, and disclosed an apartment of an appearance by no means inviting, containing 8 or 9 iron bedsteads. "There," said the guide, holding the door open and looking triumphantly round at Mr. Pickwick, "there's a room." Mr. Pickwick's face, however, betokened such a very trifling portion of satisfaction at the appearance of his lodging that the guide left him to himself and took his leave. There is no disguising the fact that Mr. Pickwick felt very low-spirited and uncomfortable in his prison cell, not for lack of society, for the prison was very full, and a bottle of wine would at once have purchased the utmost good fellowship of a few choice spirits without any more formal ceremony of introduction. But he was alone in the coarse, vulgar crowd, and felt the depression of spirit and sinking of heart naturally consequent on the reflection that he was cooped and caged up without a prospect of liberation. As to the idea of releasing himself by ministering to the sharpness of Dodson and Fogg, it never for an instant entered his thoughts. In this frame of mind, he turned into the coffee-room gallery and walked slowly to and fro. The place was intolerably dirty, and the smell of tobacco smoke perfectly suffocating. There was a perpetual slamming of doors as the people went in and out, and the noises of their voices and footsteps echoed and re-echoed through the passages constantly. A young woman with a child in her arms, who seemed scarcely able to crawl from emaciation and misery, was walking up and down the passage in conversation with her husband, who had no other place to see her in. As they passed Mr. Pickwick, he could hear the female sob, and once she burst into such a passion of grief that she was compelled to lean against the wall for support, while the man took the child in his arms and tried to soothe her. Mr. Pickwick's heart was really too full to bear it, and he went upstairs to bed. As he settled himself for the night, he began to be conscious that he was getting sleepy, whereupon he took his nightcap from the pocket in which he had taken the precaution to stow it in the morning, and leisurely undressing himself, got into bed and fell asleep.
"Bravo! Heel over toe, cut and shuffle, pay away at it, Zephyr. I'm smothered if the opera house isn't your proper hemisphere. Keep it up! Hooray!" These expressions, delivered in a most boisterous tone and accompanied by loud peals of laughter, roused Mr. Pickwick from one of those sound slumbers which, lasting in reality some half-hour, seemed to the sleeper to have been protracted for 3 weeks or a month. On the floor of the room, a man in a broad-skirted green coat with corduroy knee-smalls and grey cotton stockings was performing the most popular steps of a hornpipe. Another man, evidently very drunk, who had probably been tumbled into bed by his companions, was sitting up between the sheets, warbling as much as he could recollect of a comic song with the most intensely sentimental feeling and expression, while a third, seated on one of the bedsteads, was applauding both performers with the air of a profound connoisseur, and encouraging them by such ebullitions of feeling as had already aroused Mr. Pickwick from his sleep. This last man was a tall fellow with an olive complexion, long dark hair, and very thick bushy whiskers meeting under his chin. There was a rakish, vagabondish smartness and a kind of boastful rascality about the whole man that was worth a mine of gold.
"Why, bless the gentleman's honest heart and soul," said the Zephyr, turning around and affecting the extremity of surprise. "The gentleman's awake. Shakespeare, how d'ye do, sir? Allow me to have the felicity of hanging up your nightcap, sir."
With this, the speaker snatched that article of dress from Mr. Pickwick's head and fixed it in a twinkling on one of the drunken men. Taking a man's nightcap from his brow by violent means, and adjusting it on the head of an unknown gentleman of dirty exterior, however ingenious a witticism in itself, is unquestionably one of those which come under the denomination of practical jokes. Viewing the matter precisely in this light, Mr. Pickwick sprang vigorously out of bed, struck the Zephyr so smart a blow in the chest as to deprive him of a considerable portion of the commodity which sometimes bears his name, and then, recapturing his nightcap, boldly placed himself in an attitude of defence. "Now," said Mr. Pickwick, gasping no less from excitement than from the expenditure of so much energy, "come on, both of you, both of you!" With this liberal invitation, the worthy gentleman communicated a revolving motion to his clenched fists by way of appalling his antagonists with a display of science. It may have been Mr. Pickwick's very unexpected gallantry, or it might have been the complicated manner in which he'd got himself out of bed and fallen all in a mess on the hornpipe man, that touched his adversaries. Touched they were. For instead of then and there making an attempt to commit manslaughter, as Mr. Pickwick implicitly believed they would have done, they paused, stared at each other a short time, and finally laughed outright. "Well, you're a trump, and I like you all the better for it," said Zephyr. "Now jump into bed again, or you'll catch the rheumatics. No malice, I hope," said the man, extending his hand. "Certainly not," said Mr. Pickwick, with great alacrity, and having executed a very long and solemn shake, he got into bed again, and soon was asleep. End of Side 3.
Side 4. During his second day in the Fleet, Mr. Pickwick was shown the poor side of the prison. Not a week passes over our heads, but in every one of our prisons for debt, some of these men must inevitably expire in the slow agonies of want, if they were not relieved by their fellow prisoners. Turning these things in his mind, Mr. Pickwick mounted a narrow staircase and entered a tiny room. The general aspect of the room recalled him to himself at once, but he had no sooner cast his eyes on the figure of a man who was brooding over the dusty fire than, letting his hat fall on the floor, he stood perfectly fixed and immovable with astonishment. Yes, in tattered garments and without a coat, his common calico shirt yellow and in rags, his hair hanging over his face, his features changed with suffering and pinched with famine, there sat Mr. Alfred Jingle, his head resting on his hand, his eyes fixed upon the fire, and his whole appearance denoting misery and dejection. The noise of someone stumbling hastily into the room roused Mr. Pickwick. Turning his eyes towards the door, they encountered the newcomer, and in him, through his rags and dirt, he recognized the familiar features of Mr. Job Trotter. "Mr. Pickwick!" exclaimed Job aloud.
"Eh?" said Jingle, starting from his seat. "Oh, so it is. Queer place. Strange thing serves me right, very." Mr. Jingle thrust his hands into the place where his trouser pockets used to be, and dropping his chin upon his breast, sank back into his chair. Mr. Pickwick was affected. The two men looked so very miserable. He looked mildly at Jingle, and said, "I should like to speak to you in private. Will you step out for an instant?" "Certainly," said Jingle, rising hastily. "Can't step far. No danger of overwalking yourself here. Spike Park grounds pretty. Romantic, but not extensive." Mr. Pickwick easily perceived that his recklessness was assumed, and looking him full but not unkindly in the face, saw that his eyes were moist with tears. "Good fellow," said Jingle, pressing his hand and turning his head away. "Ungrateful dog. Boyish to cry, can't help it. Bad fever, weak, ill, hungry. Deserved it all, but suffered much, very." Wholly unable to keep up appearances any longer, and perhaps rendered worse by the effort he had made, the dejected stroller sat down on the stairs, and covering his face with his hands, sobbed like a child. "Come here, sir," said Mr. Pickwick, trying to look stern, with 4 large tears running down his waistcoat. "Take that, sir."
Take what? In the ordinary acceptation of such language, it should have been a blow. As the world runs, it ought to have been a sound, hearty cuff, for Mr. Pickwick had been duped, deceived, and wronged by the destitute outcast who was now wholly in his power. Must we tell the truth? It was something from Mr. Pickwick's waistcoat pocket, which chinked as it was given into his hand, and the giving of which, somehow or other, imparted a sparkle to the eye and a swelling to the heart of our excellent old friend as he hurried away. Sam had returned when Mr. Pickwick reached his own room, and was inspecting the arrangements that had been made for his comfort with a kind of grim satisfaction which was very pleasant to look upon. "Well, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick after a little hesitation, "listen to what I'm going to say, Sam." "Certainly, sir," rejoined Mr. Weller. "Far away, sir." "I feel that for a debtor in the Fleet to be attended by his manservant is a monstrous absurdity, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick. "For a time you must leave me." "Oh, for a time, eh, sir?" rejoined Mr. Weller, rather sarcastically. "I am serious and resolved, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick. "You are you, sir?" inquired Mr. Weller, firmly. "Very good, sir. Then so am I." Thus speaking, Mr. Weller fixed his hat on his head with great precision and abruptly left the room. "Sam!" cried Mr. Pickwick, calling after him. "Sam, here!" When Sam returned the next day, he informed his master that he, too, was now a prisoner of the Fleet. "I was arrested this here very afternoon for debt." "You arrested for debt?" exclaimed Mr. Pickwick, sinking into a chair. "Yes, for debt, sir," replied Sam. "And the man as puts me in will never let me out till you go yourself." With these words, which he repeated with great emphasis and violence, Sam Weller dashed his hat upon the ground in a most unusual state of excitement, and then, folding his arms, looked firmly and fixedly in his master's face. Mr. Pickwick felt a great deal too much touched by the warmth of Sam's attachment to be able to exhibit any manifestation of anger or displeasure at the precipitate course he had adopted, as Mr. Pickwick now learned, involuntarily consigning himself to a debtor's prison for an indefinite period. But it was the beginning of a change in Mr. Pickwick. He wandered along the galleries, up and down all the staircases, and round the whole area of the yard. There were the same squalor, the same turmoil and noise, the same general characteristics in every corner, in the best and worst alike. The whole place seemed restless and troubled, and the people were crowding and flitting to and fro like the shadows in an uneasy dream. "I've seen enough," said Mr. Pickwick, as he threw himself into a chair in his little apartment. "My head aches with these scenes, and my heart, too. Henceforth, I will be a prisoner in my own room." And Mr. Pickwick steadfastly adhered to this determination. For 3 long months he remained shut up all day, only stealing out at night to breathe the air, when the greater part of his fellow prisoners were in bed or carousing in their rooms. His health was beginning to suffer from the closeness of the confinement, but neither the often repeated entreaties of Perker and his friends, nor the still more frequently repeated warnings and admonitions of Mr. Samuel Weller could induce him to alter one jot of his inflexible resolution. While Mr. Pickwick was locked in the Fleet, a hackney cabriolet, number unrecorded, was seen to proceed at a rapid pace through the streets of London, not too far from his previous abode. "Why, if it ain't Mr. Jackson, the young man from Dodson and Fogg's!" cried Mrs. Bardell. "Why, gracious, surely Mr. Pickwick can't have paid the damages. Is anything the matter? Has anything taken place, Mr. Jackson?" said Mrs. Bardell eagerly. "Nothing whatever, ma'am," replied Mr. Jackson. "I called in Goswell Street, and hearing that you were here from the slavey, took a coach and came on. Our people want you down in the city directly, Mrs. Bardell." There was a certain degree of pride and importance about being wanted by one's lawyers in such a monstrous hurry that was by no means displeasing to Mrs. Bardell, especially as it might be reasonably supposed to enhance her consequence in the eyes of the first-floor lodger. She simpered a little, affected extreme vexation and hesitation, and at last arrived at the conclusion that she supposed she must go. Mrs. Bardell got in the cab, Mr. Jackson got in after her, and away they drove. Mrs. Bardell could not help ruminating on what Mr. Jackson had said. Shrewd creatures, these lawyers. Lord bless us, how they find people out. On they drove, and Mrs. Bardell fell asleep. She was awakened after some time by the stopping of the coach. "Bless us," said the lady, "are we at Freeman's Court?" "We're not going quite so far," replied Jackson. "Have the goodness to step out." Mrs. Bardell, not yet thoroughly awake, complied. It was a curious place, a large wall with a gate in the middle, and a gas-light burning inside. "What place is this?" inquired Mrs. Bardell, pausing. "This is the Fleet, ma'am. Wish you good night, Mrs. Bardell." As Jackson hurried away, another man with a key in his hand, who had been looking on, led the bewildered female to a short flight of steps leading to a doorway. Mrs. Bardell screamed violently, for there stood the injured Mr. Pickwick, taking his nightly allowance of air, and beside him leant Samuel Weller, who, seeing Mrs. Bardell, took his hat off with mock reverence, while his master turned indignantly on his heel. "Don't bother the woman," said the turnkey to Weller. "She's just come in." "A prisoner?" said Sam, quickly replacing his hat. "Who's the plaintiffs? What for? Speak up, old feller." "Dodson and Fogg," replied the man. "Execution on cognizant for costs." "Here, Job! Job!" shouted Sam, dashing into the passage. "Run to Mr. Perkins, Job. I want him directly. I see some good in this. Here's a game. Hooray! Where's the governor?" But there was no reply to these inquiries, for Job had started furiously off the instant he had received his commission, and Mrs. Bardell had fainted in real, downright earnest. The following day Mr. Perker arrived to talk to Mr. Pickwick. When the two were alone, he spoke to him. "Mr. Pickwick," said Perker, "Mrs. Bardell, the plaintiff in the action, is within these walls, sir." "I know it," was Mr. Pickwick's reply. "Very good," retorted Perker. "And you know how she comes here, I suppose? I mean, on what grounds? And at whose suit?" "Yes, at least I've heard Sam's account of the matter," said Mr. Pickwick, with affected carelessness. "I say, my dear sir," resumed the little man, "I say that her speedy liberation or perpetual imprisonment rests with you, and with you alone. Nobody but you can rescue her from this den of wretchedness, and you can only do that by paying the costs of this suit, both of plaintiff and defendant, into the hands of these Freeman's Court sharks." Before Mr. Pickwick could reply, before Mr. Perker had taken 1/20th part of the snuff with which so unusually long an address imperatively required to be followed up, there was a low murmuring of voices outside, and then a hesitating knock at the door. "What an annoyance that door is! Who's that?" said Mr. Pickwick. "Me, sir," replied Sam Weller, putting in his head. As Sam Weller spoke, he threw the door open, and there rushed tumultuously into the room Mr. Nathaniel Winkle, leading after him by the hand Miss Arabella Allen. "Miss Allen!" exclaimed Mr. Pickwick, rising from his chair. "No," replied Mr. Winkle, dropping on his knees. "Mrs. Winkle." "Pardon, my dear friend?" "Pardon?" Mr. Pickwick could scarcely believe the evidence of his senses. "Now then, how long have you been married, eh?" he asked, when he'd recovered. Arabella looked bashfully at her lord and master, who replied, "Only 3 days." "Only 3 days, eh?" said Mr. Pickwick. "And is your brother acquainted with all this, my dear?" "Oh, no, no," replied Arabella, changing colour. "Dear Mr. Pickwick, he must only know it from you, from your lips alone. He's so violent, so prejudiced, and has been so anxious in behalf of his friend Mr. Sawyer," added Arabella, looking down, "that I fear the consequences dreadfully." "You forget, my love," said Mr. Pickwick gently. "You forget that I'm a prisoner." "No, indeed I do not, my dear sir," replied Arabella. "But, Mr. Pickwick, unless you plead for me, I fear I've lost even him. I've done wrong, very, very wrong, I know." And here poor Arabella hid her face in her handkerchief and wept bitterly. Mr. Pickwick's nature was a good deal worked upon by these same tears. Mr. Tupman and Mr. Snodgrass arrived most opportunely in this stage of the pleadings, and as it was necessary to explain to them all that had occurred, together with the various reasons pro and con, the whole arguments were gone over again. After which everybody urged every argument in his own way and at his own length. And at last Mr. Pickwick fairly argued and remonstrated out of all his resolutions, and being in imminent danger of being argued and remonstrated out of his wits, caught Arabella in his arms, and declaring that she was a very amiable creature, and that he didn't know how it was, but that he had always been very fond of her from the first, said he could never find it in his heart to stand in the way of young people's happiness, and they might do with him as they pleased. Mr. Weller's first act on hearing this concession was to dispatch Job Trotter with an authority to deliver the formal discharge. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, Mr. Pickwick took a last look at his little room, and made his way as well as he could through the throng of debtors who pressed eagerly forward to shake him by the hand, until he reached the lodge steps. He turned here to look about him, and his eye lightened as he did so. In all the crowd of wan, emaciated faces, he saw not one which was not the happier for his sympathy and charity. Shortly after Mr. Pickwick's release, Mr. Ben Allen and Mr. Bob Sawyer sat together in the little surgery behind the shop, discussing minced veal and future prospects, when the discourse, not unnaturally, turned upon the practice acquired by Bob the aforesaid, and his present chances of deriving a competent independence from the honourable profession to which he had devoted himself. While these observations were being exchanged between Mr. Bob Sawyer and Mr. Benjamin Allen, there rolled soberly on through the streets of Bristol a private fly painted of a sad green colour, and in this vehicle sat an old lady who was its mistress and proprietor, and her coachman, Mr. Martin. The fly stopped at the door of Mr. Robert Sawyer. "Dear me," exclaimed the old lady, "I'm so flurried now I've got here, and I'm all of a tremble." The old lady was accompanied by Mr. Martin into the abode of Mr. Robert Sawyer. "My dear aunt," exclaimed Mr. Ben Allen, "how kind of you to look in upon us." "My dear Benjamin," said the old lady, struggling with the great shortness of breath, and trembling from head to foot, "don't be alarmed, my dear, but I think I'd better speak to Mr. Sawyer alone for a moment, only for one moment."
When they were alone, the first thing the lady did was to shake her head a great many times and begin to cry. "Stop a moment, ma'am," said Bob Sawyer. "What is the matter, ma'am?" "My niece, Mr. Sawyer," said the old lady. "Your friend's sister. She's married." "What?" said, or rather shouted, Mr. Bob Sawyer. "Married," repeated the old lady. Mr. Bob Sawyer stopped to hear no more, but darting from the surgery into the outer shop, cried in a stentorian voice, "Ben, my boy, she's bolted!" Mr. Ben Allen, who had been slumbering behind the counter, no sooner heard this appalling communication than he made a precipitate rush at Mr. Martin, and twisting his hand in the neckcloth of that taciturn servitor, expressed an intention of choking him where he stood. This intention he at once commenced carrying into execution with much surgical skill. Mr. Martin submitted to this operation with a very calm and agreeable expression of countenance for some seconds. Finding, however, that it threatened speedily to lead to a result which would place it beyond his power to claim wages, board, or otherwise in all time to come, he muttered an inarticulate remonstrance and felled Mr. Benjamin Allen to the ground. As that gentleman had his hands entangled in his cravat, he had no alternative but to follow him to the floor. There they both lay, struggling, when the shop door opened, and the party was increased by the arrival of two most unexpected visitors, to wit Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Samuel Weller. Mr. Ben Allen seized Mr. Pickwick by the hand and murmured in sorrowful accents, "My sister, my dear sir, my sister." "Oh, is that all?" said Mr. Pickwick. "Your sister, my dear sir, is in London, well and happy." "Her happiness is no object to me, sir," said Mr. Benjamin Allen with a flourish of his hand. "Her happiness is an object to me, sir," said Bob Sawyer. "He shall be an object to me, sir, at 12 paces, and a very pretty object I'll make of him, sir. Mean-spirited scoundrel." "His name," cried Ben Allen, "his name, Mr. Nathaniel Winkle," said Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Benjamin Allen deliberately crushed his spectacles beneath the level of his boot, and having picked up the pieces, put them down into 3 separate pockets. "Explain it, sir," cried Bob Sawyer fiercely. "It's a conspiracy," said Ben Allen. "A regular plant," added Bob Sawyer. "Pray hear me," urged Mr. Pickwick, as Mr. Ben Allen fell into a chair that patients were bled in and gave way to his pocket-handkerchief. "As regards my young friend, I must beg to add that in every point of worldly advantage he is at least on an equal footing with yourself, if not a much better one, and that unless I hear this question discussed with becoming temper and moderation, I decline any more said upon the subject." Mr. Pickwick found a powerful assistant in the old lady, who ventured to approach Mr. Benjamin Allen with a few comforting reflections, of which the chief were that after all perhaps it was well it was no worse. The least said the soonest mended, and upon her word she didn't know that it was so very bad after all. While the good lady was bestowing this objurgation on Mr. Ben Allen, Bob Sawyer was observed to apply himself several times to the mouth of a black bottle, under the influence of which his features gradually assumed a cheerful and even joyful expression. And at last he emerged, bottle in hand, and remarking that he was very sorry to say he had been making a fool of himself, begged to propose the health and happiness of Mr. and Mrs. Winkle, whose felicity, so far from envying, he would be the first to congratulate them upon. Hearing this, Mr. Ben Allen suddenly arose from his chair, and seizing the black bottle, drank the toast so heartily that the liquor being strong, he became nearly as black in the face as the bottle, and Mr. Pickwick, followed by Samuel Weller, took his leave. Upon their arrival in London, Mr. Pickwick proposed that he and Sam should alight in the neighbourhood of the George and Vulture. To this Mr. Weller readily agreed. "Dear me, Mr. Weller," said the pretty housemaid, meeting Sam at the door, "there's a letter been waiting here for you 4 days. And more than that, it's got immediate on the outside. There, take it." Sitting himself down beside Mary on the window seat, Mr. Weller opened the letter and glanced at the contents. "Hello!" exclaimed Sam. "What's all this?" He read as follows.
My dear Samuel, I'm very sorry to have the pleasure of being a bearer of ill news. Your mother-in-law caught cold, consequence of imprudently setting too long on the damp grass in the rain. The doctor says that if she swallowed warm brandy and water afterwards instead of before, she mightn't have been no worse. Her wheels was immediately greased and everything done to set her a-going as could be invented. Your father had hopes as she would have worked round as usual, but just as she was a-turning the corner, my boy, she took the wrong road and went downhill with a velocity you never see, and notwithstanding the drag was put on directly by the medical man, it weren't of no use at all, for she paid the last pike at 20 minutes before 6 o'clock yesterday evening. Your father says that if you'll come and see me, Sammy, he will take it as a very great favour, for I'm very lonely, Samuel. Tony Weller.
Sam read the letter all over once more, and appearing to form a clear notion of its contents for the first time, ejaculated thoughtfully as he folded it up. "So the poor creature's dead. I'm sorry for it. She weren't a bad-disposed woman, if them shepherds had let her alone. I'm very sorry for it." Mr. Weller uttered these words in so serious a manner that the pretty housemaid cast down her eyes and looked very grave. "Good-bye," said Sam. "Good-bye," rejoined the pretty housemaid, turning her head away. "Well, shake hands, won't you?" said Sam. The pretty housemaid put out a hand, which, although it was a housemaid's, was a very small one, and rose to go. "I shan't be very long away," said Sam. "You're always away," said Mary, giving her head the slightest possible toss in the air. "You no sooner come, Mr. Weller, than you go again." Mr. Weller drew the household beauty closer to him. "I shan't be away more than a day, or two at the farthest." It was just 7 o'clock, when Samuel Weller, alighting from the box of a stagecoach which passed through Dorking, stood within a few hundred yards of the Marquis of Granby. Sam walked softly in. Glancing around, he quickly recognized his parent in the distance, and called him by name several times. The widower was seated at a small round table in the little room behind the bar, smoking a pipe, his eyes intently fixed upon the fire. "Sammy," said Mr. Weller, "you're welcome." "I've been a-calling to you half a dozen times," said Sam, hanging his hat on a peg, "but you didn't hear me." "Those was very sensible observations as she made, Sammy," said Mr. Weller, driving the smoke away with his hand after a long silence. "What observations?" inquired Sam. "Them as she made arter she was took ill," replied the old gentleman. "What was they?" "Something to this here effect. Well, as she says, I'm afeard I've not done by you quite what I ought to have done. You're a very kind-hearted man, and I might have made your home more comfortable. I begin to see now," she says, "when it's too late, that if a married woman wishes to be religious, she should begin with discharging her duties at home. But I hope, when I'm gone, Weller, that you'll think on me as I was afore I knowed them people, and as I really was by nature. Susan, says I was took up very short by this, Samuel, I don't deny it, my boy. Susan, I says, you've been a very good wife to me altogether. Don't say nothing at all about it. She smiled at this, Samuel, but she died after all. Lost in the immense field of conjecture opened by this reflection, the elder Mr. Weller laid his pipe on the table and stirred the fire with a meditative visage. While the old gentleman was thus engaged, a very buxom-looking cook, who had been bustling about, bestowed many smirks of recognition upon Sam.
"Sammy," said Mr. Weller, If I was to stop here alone 1 week, only 1 week, my boy, that here woman 'ud marry me by force and violence afore it was over. Sammy, I feel I ain't safe anywheres but on the box."
"How are you safer there than anywhere else?" interrupted Sam.
"'Cause a coachman's a privileged individual," replied Mr. Weller, looking fixedly at his son. "'Cause a coachman may do without suspicion what other men may not. 'Cause a coachman may be on the very amicablest terms with 80 mile of females, and yet nobody think he ever means to marry any one of 'em."
Mr. Weller resumed his pipe with a more serene countenance. "Somebody's a-tapping at the door," said Sam. No notice being taken of the taps, the unseen visitor, after a short lapse, ventured to open the door and peep in. It was no female head that was thrust in at the partially opened door, but the long black locks and red face of Mr. Stiggins. Mr. Weller's pipe fell from his hands.
"Oh, my young friend," said Mr. Stiggins, breaking the silence in a very low voice, "here's a sorrowful affliction."
Sam nodded very slightly. "For the man of wrath, too," added Mr. Stiggins. "It makes a vessel's heart bleed." Mr. Weller was overheard by his son to murmur something relative to making a vessel's nose bleed, but Mr. Stiggins heard him not.
"Do you know, young man," whispered Mr. Stiggins, drawing his chair closer to Sam, "whether she's left Emmanuel anything?" "Who's he?" inquired Sam. "The chapel," replied Mr. Stiggins. "Our chapel, our fold, Mr. Samuel."
"She hasn't left the fold, nothing, nor the shepherd nothing, nor the animals nothing," said Sam decisively, "nor the dogs neither." Mr. Stiggins looked slyly at Sam, glanced at the old gentleman, who was sitting with his eyes closed as if asleep, and drawing his chair still nearer, said, "Nothing for me, Mr. Samuel?" Sam shook his head. "I think there's something," said Stiggins, turning as pale as he could turn. "Consider, Mr. Samuel, no little token?" "Not so much as the worth of that 'ere old umbrella of yourn," replied Sam. "Perhaps," said Mr. Stiggins, hesitatingly after a few moments' deep thought, "perhaps she recommended me to the care of the man of wrath, Mr. Samuel?" "I think that's very likely from what he said," rejoined Sam. "He was a-speaking about you just now." "Was he, though?" exclaimed Stiggins, brightening up. "Oh, he's changed, I dare say. We might live very comfortably together now, Mr. Samuel, eh? I could take care of his property when you go away. Good care, you see." Heaving a long-drawn sigh, Mr. Stiggins paused for a response. Sam nodded, and Mr. Weller, the elder, gave vent to an extraordinary sound, which, being neither a groan, nor a grunt, nor a gasp, nor a growl, seemed to partake in some degree of the character of all four. Mr. Stiggins, encouraged by this sound, which he understood to betoken remorse or repentance, looked about him, rubbed his hands, wept, smiled again, and then, walking softly across the room to a well-remembered shelf in one corner, took down a tumbler and with great deliberation put 4 lumps of sugar in it. Having got thus far, he looked about him again and sighed grievously. With that he walked softly into the bar, and presently returning with the tumbler half full of pineapple rum, advanced to the kettle which was singing gaily on the hob, mixed his grog, stirred it, sipped it, sat down, and taking a long and hearty pull at the rum and water, stopped for breath. The elder Mr. Weller, who still continued to make various strange and uncouth attempts to appear asleep, offered not a single word during these proceedings, but when Stiggins stopped for breath, the elder Mr. Weller darted upon him, and snatching the tumbler from his hand, threw the remainder of the rum and water in his face and the glass itself into the grate. Then, seizing the reverend gentleman firmly by the collar, he suddenly fell to kicking him most furiously, accompanying every application of his top boots to Mr. Stiggins's person with sundry violent and incoherent anathemas upon his limbs, eyes, and body. It was a beautiful and exhilarating sight to see the red-nosed man writhing in Mr. Weller's grasp, and his whole frame quivering with anguish as kick followed kick in rapid succession. It was a still more exciting spectacle to behold Mr. Weller, after a powerful struggle, immersing Mr. Stiggins's head in a horse trough full of water and holding it there until he was half suffocated. While Samuel Weller and his father were thus engaged, Mr. Pickwick decided to pay a call on Mr. Perker. The greeting between Mr. Pickwick and his professional adviser was warm and cordial. The client was scarcely ensconced in the attorney's armchair, however, when a knock was heard at the door, and Jingle and Job walked into the room, but seeing Mr. Pickwick, stopped short in some confusion. Jingle was decently and cleanly dressed, and so was Job, who stood bolt upright behind him, staring at Mr. Pickwick with a visage of iron. "When do they go to Liverpool?" inquired Mr. Pickwick, half aside to Perker.
"This evening, sir, at 7 o'clock, said Job, taking one step forward. "By the heavy coach from the city, sir."
"Are your places taken?"
"Here they are, sir," replied Job.
"You fully made up your mind to go?"
"I have, sir," answered Job.
"By compounding with his creditor, relieving him from prison and paying for his passage," said Perker, addressing Mr. Pickwick, "you have already lost upwards of £50.
"Not lost," said Jingle, hastily. "Pay it all. Stick to business, cash up every farthing. Yellow fever, perhaps. Can't help that. If not—"
"He means to say," said Job, advancing a few paces, "that if he's not carried off by the fever, he'll pay the money back again. If he lives, he will, Mr. Pickwick. I'll see it done. I know he will, sir," said Job, with energy. "I could undertake to swear it." Job Trotter, with a humble and grateful bow to Mr. Pickwick, took his friend gently by the arm and led him away. "A worthy couple," said Perker, as the door closed behind them. "I hope they may become so," replied Mr. Pickwick. Then, bidding his friend good day, he also took his leave. Mr. Pickwick was sitting at home later, musing over many things, when Mary stepped lightly into the room, and advancing to the table, said rather hastily, "Oh, if you please, sir, Samuel's downstairs, and he says, may his father see you." "Surely," replied Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Weller entered. "How do you do, Mr. Weller?" said Mr. Pickwick.
"Very hearty, thank you, sir," replied the widower.
"You are not an advocate for matrimony, I think, Mr. Weller?" Mr. Weller shook his head. He was wholly unable to speak. Vague thoughts of some widow having been successful in her designs on Mr. Pickwick choked his utterance. "Did you happen to see a young girl downstairs when you came in just now with your son?" inquired Mr. Pickwick.
"Here I see a young girl," replied Mr. Weller shortly.
"That young person," said Mr. Pickwick, "is attached to your son."
"To Samuel Weller?" exclaimed the parent.
"Yes," said Mr. Pickwick. "I've observed them on several occasions, and entertain no doubt at all about it. Suppose I were desirous of establishing them comfortably as man and wife in some little business or situation where they might hope to obtain a decent living. What should you think of it, Mr. Weller?" At first, Mr. Weller received with wry faces a proposition involving the marriage of anybody in whom he took an interest. But as Mr. Pickwick argued the point with him, and laid great stress on the fact that Mary was not a widow, he gradually became more tractable. At length, he said that it was not for him to oppose Mr. Pickwick's inclination, and that he would be very happy to yield to his advice, upon which Mr. Pickwick joyfully took him at his word and called Sam into the room. "Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, "I'm not so blind as not to have seen a long time since that you entertain something more than a friendly feeling towards Mrs. Winkle's maid. The lady not being a widow, I wish to free you from the restraint which your present position imposes on you by enabling you to marry this girl at once. I shall be proud, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, whose voice had faltered a little hitherto, but now resumed its customary tone, "proud and happy to make your future prospects in life my grateful and peculiar care." There was a profound silence for a short time, and then Sam said, in a low and husky sort of voice, but firm withal, "I'm very much obliged to you for your goodness, sir, as is only like yourself, but it can't be done." "Can't be done?" ejaculated Mr. Pickwick in astonishment. "Samuel," said Mr. Weller with dignity. "I say it can't be done," repeated Sam in a louder key. "What's to become of you, sir?" "My good fellow, I am growing older, and want repose and quiet. My rambles are over. I shall keep my word," said Mr. Pickwick, shaking his head. "New scenes have closed upon me. My rambles are at an end." "Then that's the very best reason why you should always have somebody by you," rejoined Sam. "My mind's made up, and nothing can ever alter it." Who could combat this resolution? Not Mr. Pickwick. He derived at that moment more pride and luxury of feeling from the disinterested attachment of his humble friends than 10,000 protestations from the greatest men living could have awakened in his heart. For a whole week, Mr. Pickwick and Sam Weller were from home all day long, returning just in time for dinner, and then wearing an air of mystery and importance quite foreign to their natures. It was evident that very grave and eventful proceedings were on foot, but various surmises were afloat regarding their precise character. At length it was unanimously resolved by the Pickwick Club that Mr. Pickwick should be called upon to explain his conduct. With this view, Mr. Wardle, whose daughter Emily Mr. Snodgrass had now made his own, invited the full circle to dinner at the Adelphi. The decanters passed from hand to hand with unwonted briskness, and Mr. Pickwick, looking round on the faces of his friends with cheerful smile, at last explained, "I have determined on retiring to some quiet, pretty neighbourhood in the vicinity of London. I saw a house in Dulwich which exactly suited my fancy. I have taken it and furnished it, and I intend to enter upon it at once, trusting that I may yet live to spend many quiet years in peaceful retirement, cheered through life by the society of my friends, and followed in death by their affectionate remembrance." Here Mr. Pickwick paused, and Emily and Arabella sobbed audibly. The Pickwick Club exists no longer. God bless you all. With these words, Mr. Pickwick filled and drained a bumper with a trembling hand, and his eyes moistened as his friends rose with one accord and pledged him from their hearts. Let us leave our old friend in one of those moments of unmixed happiness of which, if we seek them, there are ever some to cheer our transitory existence here. There are dark shadows on the earth, but its lights are stronger in the contrast. Some men, like bats or owls, have better eyes for the darkness than for the light. We, who have no such optical powers, are better pleased to take our last parting look at the visionary companions of many solitary hours, when the brief sunshine of the world is blazing full upon them. It is the fate of most men who mingle with the world to make many real friends and lose them in the course of nature. It is the fate of all authors or chroniclers to create imaginary friends and lose them in the course of art. Nor is this the full extent of their misfortunes, for they are required to furnish an account of them besides. In compliance with this custom, unquestionably a bad one, we subjoin a few biographical words in relation to the party at Mr. Pickwick's assembled. Mr. and Mrs. Winkle, being fully received into favour by the old gentleman, were shortly afterwards installed in a newly built house not half a mile from Mr. Pickwick's. Mr. Winkle, being engaged to the city as agent or town correspondent of his father, exchanged his old costume for the ordinary dress of Englishmen, and presented all the external appearance of a civilized Christian ever afterwards. Mr. and Mrs. Snodgrass settled at Dingley Dell, where they purchased and cultivated a small farm, more for occupation than profit. Mr. Snodgrass, being occasionally abstracted and melancholy, is to this day reputed a great poet among his friends and acquaintances, although we do not find that he has ever written anything to encourage this belief. Mr. Tupman, when his friends married and Mr. Pickwick settled, took lodgings at Richmond, where he has ever since resided. He walks constantly on the terrace during the summer months with a youthful and jaunty air, which has rendered him the admiration of numerous elderly ladies of single condition who reside in his vicinity. He has never proposed again. Mr. Bob Sawyer passed over to Bengal, accompanied by Mr. Benjamin Allen. They each had the yellow fever 14 times, and then resolved to try a little abstinence, during which period they had been doing well. Mrs. Bardell let lodgings to many conversable single gentlemen with great profit, but never brought any more actions for breach of promise of marriage. Her attorneys, Messrs. Dodson and Fogg, continue in business, from which they realize a large income, and in which they are universally considered among the sharpest of the sharp. Sam Weller kept his word, and remained unmarried for 2 years. His old housekeeper dying at the end of that time, Mr. Pickwick promoted Mary to the situation, on condition of her marrying Mr. Weller at once, which he did without a murmur. From the circumstance of 2 sturdy little boys having been repeatedly seen at the gate of the back garden, there is reason to suppose that Sam has some family. Mr. Pickwick himself continued to reside in his new house, employing his leisure hours in arranging the memoranda which he afterwards presented to the secretary of the once famous club, or in hearing Sam Weller read aloud, with such remarks as suggested themselves to his mind, which never failed to afford Mr. Pickwick great amusement. He was much troubled at first by the numerous applications made to him by Mr. Snodgrass, Mr. Winkle, and Mr. Trundle to act as godfather to their offspring, but he has become used to it now, and officiates as a matter of course. He never had occasion to regret his bounty to Mr. Jingle, for both that person and Job Trotter became in time worthy members of society, although they have always steadily objected to return to the scene of their old haunts and temptations. Mr. Pickwick is somewhat infirm now, but he retains all his former juvenility of spirit, and may still be frequently seen contemplating the pictures in the Dulwich Gallery, or enjoying a walk about the pleasant neighbourhood on a fine day. The children idolize him, and so indeed does the whole neighbourhood. Every year he repairs to a large family merrymaking at Mr. Wardle's. On this, as on all other occasions, he is invariably attended by the faithful Sam, between whom and his master there exists a steady and reciprocal attachment which nothing but death will terminate. The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. Copyright Dove Books on Tape, Incorporated.